Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, officers and members. Welcome to this Development Control Committee meeting on Wednesday the 25th of February. First thing I must do is read out the fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the back of this room, so you go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. I would also remind you that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. That's right, isn't it? It's working. And I would just remind everyone to switch off their telephones or turn them on to silent. Thank you. Apologies for absence. I have Councillors Tucker and Court, and in their place is Councillors Leeks and Tate. Declarations of interest. Do I have any? Yes, Councillor Frank.
Yes, on item 9, the 22 Barrington Drive, I'll be stepping down as a visiting councillor, as I've already predetermined.
Thank you. That's fine. Any more? All right. Urgent matters. You have.
Thank you, Chair. Just consistent with the approach we've taken today, it was just to report to members that we had the Overton Hill appeal decision received earlier this week. So members may recall this was a scheme for 120 dwellings on the outskirts of Overton, which was initially refused. Following the submission of the appeal, the main two reasons for a refusal related to landscape and sustainability of the site were withdrawn following consultation with the local ward members and DC committee chairman. Nevertheless, the inspector considered the issues that had been raised, so the impact on landscape and sustainability, and effectively allowed the appeal. In brief, in conclusion, the inspector said that it would bring considerable benefits, including a notable contribution to housing supply in general and affordable housing in particular in a borough where there is a shortfall of deliverable housing land. Specifically then went on to say that in considering paragraph 14 of the MPPF that we've mentioned at this committee before, the inspector concluded that there would be no adverse impacts which would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So similar sort of conclusion, if you like, to other appeals that have come in. But as I say, just reporting it in terms of it being the latest major residential scheme.
Thank you, Mike. Minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of January, members. Do I have your agreement to sign these? Thank you. But just before we move on to the applications for planning permission and public participation, for the benefit of the members of the public attending, I'd like to explain who everybody is around this table. My name is Councillor Donald Sherlock, and I'm the chairman of the committee. Down the sides of the table to the left and right are the councillors who sit on the committee and who make the decisions on the applications this evening. Immediately to my left and right are the officers who will be advising us councillors. In addition, I'd like to explain that the Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be looking at the evidence brought before us tonight and will make a decision based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local guidance and policy. And I do understand that planning can be emotive, but I ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout the evening. And may I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to return to their seats once their presentation is complete. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. And may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and ask members to keep their comments on each item to a maximum of 4 minutes. Thank you. Now we move on to Vice Chair, yes. We don't have a Vice Chairman. Are there any proposals?
I propose Councillor Dodson.
Thank you. Thank you. Agreed? Agreed, thank you. Sven, would you like to come up? So we move to applications for planning permission and public participation thereof. And the first item is Burnham Copse Infant School at Tadley. The officer will present, Mark Turner, and then I will ask Mr. Thorne to come and speak up at the public speaking place afterwards. Okay, thank you. Mark, do you want to?
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, councillors. The first application this evening is at Burnham Copse Infant School, Newchurch Road, Tadley, Hampshire. The application proposal is an outline planning application for the redevelopment of the former Burnham Copse Infant School site for up to 36 residential dwellings, Class C3 use, including open space and associated car parking. All matters are reserved on this application, councillors, so in effect what you're considering is the principle of redevelopment of the site to provide up to 36 dwellings. I'll turn initially to the update sheet, if I may. There is an error on the update sheet which I ran from the computer system. You'll note throughout the update it talks about recommendation of granted. Clearly granted is not correct. It's recommendation to approve. That's my error in terms of running the update. You've already had the officer's report with regard to this application. In terms of the update, additional information has been received from the applicant to try and address the concerns raised in relation to the AWE issues discussed in the main papers. It's been consulted on. In effect, the Office of Nuclear Regulation maintains their objection to the scheme. Members have visited the site. We attended the site last week, noting its relationship with surrounding properties, specifically the dwelling design. In reality, what I would suggest with this application, members, is everything is acceptable to the officers, with the exception of the issues surrounding AWE and the comments and the objections of the ONR. Now, what we need to bear in mind is there a statutory consultee. Ultimately, you are the decision maker. It's down to you to determine whether or not the comments of the ONR outweigh the balancing exercise to be taken with regard to the benefits of redeveloping a previously developed site to provide housing. Obviously, we're aware of the need for housing numbers. I don't think I've got anything more to add at this stage, members.
Thank you, Mark. Now, is Mr. Thorne of Hampshire County Council there? Thank you. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Thorne, and I'll give you a warning of 1 minute left.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, councillors. My name is Michael Charles Thorne. I'm a Fellow of the Society for Radiological Protection and have approximately 40 years of experience relating to environmental radioactivity and the modelling of radionuclide dispersion in the environment. I was the author of the radiological impact assessment that was provided in support of the application. I accept that the proposed development would result in an increment in population within the detailed emergency planning zone. However, set against the substantial benefits of the development, I do not think that this is a factor to which much weight should be given. Now, this is in part because the probability of accidents at AWE Aldermaston with significant off-site radiological consequences is very low. Specifically, if the AWE Aldermaston site was to continue to be used for its present-day purpose for another 100 years, the chance of an accident with significant off-site radiological consequences during that period would be less than 1 in 100, and might be much less. However, it's also important to realise that the type of accident that could occur is not catastrophic. If such an accident was to happen, individual radiation doses would be about the same as the dose that you would receive from a medical CT scan or in a few years from natural background. Indeed, in Cornwall, an area of high natural background, you'd receive such a dose in about 1 year. In turn, on the emergency plan, the doses that could be received as a consequence of an accident are so low that sheltering for a few hours rather than evacuation would be the primary response. For those who sheltered, doses would likely be reduced to about 1/10 of those incurred without sheltering. Requirements for subsequent relocation or clean-up could be assessed without the pressure for immediate action. The additional resource implications for the emergency plan arising from the proposed development largely come down to knocking at the few houses and flats where residents had opted out of the emergency telephone system. The total population of the proposed development is no more than about 100. This is no larger than the fluctuation of the total local population from census to census already accommodated under the emergency plan. Larger short-term changes in the number of people present in the area occur, for example, due to the local presence of school, community centre and church. These are also accommodated in the emergency plan. The proposed development is larger than the 4-unit scheme at Mount Pleasant referred to in the officer's report that was dismissed at appeal. However, the dismissal was because that scheme did not provide sufficient community benefits to outweigh the radiological risks. This is not the case with the proposed scheme, which has closer parallels with Boundary Hall, where the Secretary of State granted planning permission for 115 dwellings. That scheme provided a number of significant planning benefits, including affordable housing and replacement community facilities. As with Boundary Hall, the application before you has a number of community benefits both on and off-site, 36 new units, of which 40% are affordable housing, new on-site public open space, as well as the transfer of land for community uses so that the youth centre can be implemented, further off-site contributions towards open space and equipped play. In addition, the application will support Hampshire County Council in disposing of the site to a residential developer with the anticipated proceeds to be reinvested in the local school system. In conclusion, both the substantial benefits of the scheme and the precedent set by Boundary Hall are considered to outweigh the risks to health posed by AWE Aldermaston. So we respectfully request that the committee grant permission.
Thank you. Now, any questions? Councillor Frankham.
I'm just wondering whether, as a Hampshire County Councillor, this could be in conflict. If I could have the legal opinion, please.
To err on the side of caution, I would say that you potentially do. However, it's not obviously a disclosable pecuniary interest in the true sense of the word, but if you want to err on the side of caution, then I would advise you that you would have a conflict of interest and to refrain from voting on this matter.
Right, thank you. Then I would take that advice, and I will stay silent and not vote.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. In your opinion, as an expert in this field, can the emergency plan accommodate 100 extra people?
In my view, it can. As I mentioned, the fluctuations in the local population from census to census are larger than this. Furthermore, the emergency plan, if you implemented it, would have to respond to particular areas in Tadley. If you went to a sector slightly to the west or to the east, you would be dealing with a larger number of population than if you went to this area. So the emergency plan has to be constituted to handle variable numbers of people. We're not talking about here generating a high-density hot spot, if you like, that would be a special new problem for the emergency plan. Also, the site is not on emergency access routes to AWE Aldermaston, so in that sense it doesn't impact on the plan. As I say, I think the main change to the plan is that you have to ensure warning to the appropriate people on that site. But I think that's within the framework of the existing plan.
Councillor Leeks.
Hello, Mr. Thorne. I'm probably the nearest councillor to AWE than anybody else here. Can I just ask one question? If you were looking for a house, would you be worried about living there?
Didn't come on. The answer is no, I wouldn't, and I am fine, but then I'm probably a little bit prejudiced in that I have worked with radiation all my life, and so if you say, am I phobic about radiation? No, I've worked in irradiated conditions and I've been in places like the Chernobyl zone, so perhaps I'm not the best person to answer about whether I would be happy buying a house there.
And the other thing is, I need to put this politely, but you're obviously aware that the leaflet that goes round says, there's a problem, you go indoors, shut the door, listen to the radio and stay there.
That's absolutely correct on the Repair leaflet, yeah, and that was my comment, if you recall, that the advice is to shelter. The advice is very specifically not to evacuate because of the conventional hazards associated with evacuation.
Thank you. Councillor Tate.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Thorne, actually, you've just answered part of the question I was going to ask, but I'll just ask it in a slightly different way. Within the reasons for refusal, it talks about evacuation, and clearly evacuation is not the main thrust of protection. It's fair to say, you've just answered the question really, that the main thrust of the emergency information is purely protection and not evacuation.
Perhaps I could just say a few words more which I think may help. One of the reasons is that the doses are relatively low, so we're not talking about an immediate risk to health, which obviously is a situation where you would evacuate. If you were concerned with explosions, for example, that could directly impact on people, that's a good reason to get them out of the area. We're also talking typically about, if there were accidents, atmospheric releases of particulates. They don't have long-range dose implications, so the best thing you can do is not to breathe the material in, and going indoors and shutting the doors and windows is fundamental to that. And perhaps I should, in a little bit more response to an earlier question, getting people out, if after they have sheltered you decided that it was a good idea for them to move away from the area, once the initial plume has passed and there would be a small amount of residual contamination on the ground, but you would get very little dose from that material if then people came out of their houses and moved out of the area.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Thorne. Can I just seek your advice, Chairman? I wanted to ask a question about something which is included on the update sheet, but obviously Mr. Thorne isn't the author of that, and but he is mentioned in it, and I didn't. Have you seen this update sheet we have?
Sorry, I don't believe I have.
Sorry, Chairman. Then it was just how I posed the question, really. But there's a section on page 2 of the update sheet which talks about this whole process of emergency planning and evacuation. But there's one sentence at the end of the first paragraph which I just can't decipher, and I wanted some explanation of that from somebody. It's a question of, could I start with the author and see what Mr. Thorne says about that? Would that be all right? Thank you. It's the first paragraph on page 2 of the update sheet, and obviously refers to the comparison between a single residential development and something larger, obviously by definition talking about more people. But the last sentence says, as one example, increases in sector population density are likely to influence and increase the number of persons who attempt shadow evacuation, inverted commas. Not quite sure what that is, but i.e. evacuations while the instruction to shelter is the public countermeasure in place, and such shadow evacuations could materially affect the implementation of the emergency plan. I just don't understand that, really. I mean, are we talking about a real situation in terms of evacuation, or I'm not sure what shadow evacuation means. Sorry, that's all I really wanted to clarify in terms of the advice that's given to us in this update sheet.
Mr. Thorne, would you like a copy of this? Yes, I think it would too. The officer will thinks he can clarify it for us.
Sorry, Councillor, I think my reading of this, and again, effectively what this is, Mr Thorne has made further commentary to the original concerns expressed by the ONR as a result of the application. They've had the opportunity to read his concerns and they've obviously commented back. That said, I think what they're referring to here is, you're quite right, that the concept is that people stay indoors and don't evacuate. I think that the term shadow evacuation is for those people that attempt to evacuate despite the advice to stay indoors. So it's effectively that the extra number that really shouldn't be evacuating, but they are.
Everybody else understands everybody else.
Councillor Bound.
Well, it says there about the sector population increasing. I should have thought if they're evacuating, the sector population would decrease.
Mr. Thorne, do you have any comments on these?
I think I can clarify both of those points. The siting of nuclear installations has typically been addressed through a sector-based calculation over many years, with the risks to population in 30-degree sectors evaluated. That was the basis of, for many years, the siting of nuclear installations and the control of developments in the vicinity of them. The sectorised approach has been carried over into detailed emergency planning zones, and so it has often been expressed in terms of the number of people in 30-degree sectors in different directions from the site. This, I think, discussion arose originally because the two sectors either side of the sector in which the proposed development occurred had higher total populations than the sector in which the development occurred. So the issue here is whether the institution of the development in that sector would give rise to a significant number of additional people who attempted evacuation if the accident was impacting on that sector rather than the sectors to either side of it. Without having looked at the document in more detail, I can't comment further, but I think that those are the issues that are being raised here, because you could have evacuation actually from all three of those sectors. It's or people self-evacuating from all three of those sectors.
Thank you. Can you switch off? Councillor Potter, followed by Councillor Leeks.
Could I just try one other thing? I mean, in simple terms, am I right in saying the analysis is that, whichever way I put it, 36 single residential applications here, there and everywhere in terms of the area we're talking about wouldn't represent quite the risk that 36 in one block would? Is that the sort of analysis that's made here? I mean, it's theoretical stuff, isn't it, really? Because if all those 36 individual occupants decided to ignore the advice, the same impact would occur, but it's purely on scale, really, that this is based, isn't it, I think? Is that right?
I think the argument about evacuations is purely on scale. It's saying that with 36 additional residences, 87 total people, some of those might choose to evacuate even though advised to shelter. So I think getting that into context, we must be talking about a few people who opt to go against the guidance, if you like.
Thank you. Councillor Leeks and then Councillor...
I hope this will be my final question, but I'm hoping you can clear up. Was this really all brought in because of Buncefield? Because before that, we had no problems, we used to accept, and if this was an ordinary application, say 6 or 7 years ago, we probably wouldn't be here talking about it. But is it really being brought in because of what happened at Buntsville?
No, is the easy answer, because the issues about control of development around nuclear licence sites go back to the earliest days of the nuclear industry in the 1950s, and the most recent enunciation of policy in Hansard was by Michael Spicer in 1988, so they go back a long way before Buntsfield.
Sorry, Jim. In that case, if it went back to the 50s, was it you said, why the hell did they build all those houses around Tadley? That's my last thing on it.
That one I'm afraid I can't answer.
Councillor Bound.
Just one question, please. The prevailing winds are talked about in the report that I read in detail. The prevailing wind, would you agree, is leaves the site downwind and not upwind of any foreseeable accident?
I'm going to be careful about that because if you go back to the Boundary Hall inquiry and you look to my evidence there, you'll see a picture of the windrows. Now, as with most UK sites, although there are asymmetries in the windrows, and I think you're right about the downwind direction, it's not an absolute. The wind blows in all directions at different times during the year, so it's a matter of relative probabilities. My estimate is that about 1/10 of the time the wind would be broadly blowing towards the development. When I quote probabilities of accidents per year, which I do in the radiological report, I don't actually include an allowance for the approximately 10% probability that the wind would be blowing towards the development.
Any more questions for Mr. Thorne? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Ward councillors, do you want to speak now, Councillor Tate, or later? Councillor Bound? You will speak now, right?
In general purposes, as the ward councillor and living not far from this and living within the exclusion zones, the issue here is about balance of risk and benefit. And I think that anybody who lives in Tadley and the area understands completely what they live near and what it does, and has significant confidence in what happens in AWE, how it's managed, and the risks involved with that, because we've chosen to live there. So the reason for refusal about the evacuation plan, I think, is really quite important with this, because the evacuation, which is constantly talked about as an evacuation, has a perception of masses of people leaving a site in one particular time, when actually the nature of the accidents, both in the report and understanding what's happened in the past, are such that that isn't the case. The reality is that evacuation does not mean people leaving in a disorganized mass in a rush of panic. The guidance that the residents of Tadley have are: you stay in your building, you close the doors, you lock the windows. So I think that there is partly a misunderstanding or a misperception that I think is very important within this, that we as a committee, if we can listen to the report, understand clearly that what it is the risks are, and therefore what the benefits are with this. There are risks with anything. The risks are minimal, and to me as a resident, I think the risks are outweighed by the benefits of using this particular site, and therefore I personally feel that the site itself lends itself to development, lends itself to residential development, and therefore we should be aiming to approve this because of the reasons I've given before.
Sorry, I forgot about questions to officers. Should we do them now? Yeah, questions to officers. Councillor Bound.
if you don't mind, Chair, I will read out what I got so that I don't forget anything. Right. This planning application for up to 36 houses on the new derelict Burnham Copse Infant School site has a recommendation from our officers for refusal. And this refusal is primarily down to an objection to the application from the Office of Nuclear Regulation and the Civil Contingencies Manager at West Berks Council. At the heart of the objection is the possible impact on the emergency plan that would be put into practice was there to be a release of radioactive contamination from the AWE. There is no nuclear reactor at the AWE, but they do use radioactive isotopes in the form of plutonium, uranium and tritium. I would ask the members here to consider these points. There has never been a radiation emergency in the lifetime of this establishment, which was established in the 50s. The recognised probability of there being an emergency at the AWE site is 1 in 100,000 years, and that could be from a very slight event to a more serious one. Most of the hazard from a radiation emergency involving the release of radioactive material at the AWE would come from alpha radiation. Alpha radiation cannot penetrate the outer layer of human skin, a single sheet of paper or a pane of glass, much less a wall. And that is a quote from the Repier booklet given to all households in the Tadley area. It goes on to say, there will be no immediate health effect caused by a release of radioactive material on members of the public following a serious incident at the AWE. The trigger for sheltering under the Repier Radiation Emergency Preparedness and Public Information Regulations is 5 millisieverts, downwind of the emergency. The average annual dosage from a natural radiation is 2 millisieverts, and the annual dosage in Cornwall is 8 millisieverts. The annual legal worker dose over the wire is 20 millisieverts. The Repier booklet given out to households tells residents to go in, stay indoors with windows closed, turn off fans and damp down any fires, wash, shower if you've been outside for any time, tune into the radio and don't use the phone. Don't leave the area. The emergency plan does not foresee any realistic probability of the emergency being of such a magnitude that any evacuation will be needed from the area. And as there are some 16,000 people in the Tadley area, one can see that chaos would ensue anyhow, and you wouldn't be able to stop people moving from the area even if you wanted to. The area most likely to be affected is actually in West Berkshire, and West Berkshire have charge of our emergency plan, and we're sort of consultees to it. The area that's being spoken of, as Mr. Thorne mentioned, there's only a 1 in 10 chance of the wind blowing in that direction. The area around the planning site is already quite heavily populated and is in close proximity to a community centre, a dentist, 2 churches, and a soon-to-be-built youth centre. And this authority gave permission for that youth centre. 36 new dwellings will not raise the population density in the area by any appreciable extent. There's also a nearby shopping parade, banks and industrial estates. Now, I don't consider myself to be foolhardy, and I do have the best interests of my residents at heart. I've no wish to put their health at risk, but I would ask the committee to take on board the minimal risk of there being an event at the AWE, 1 in every 100,000 years based on their own figures. On the nearby Boundary Hall site that is much closer to the AWE and was for 113 dwellings, the Secretary of State said in his judgment that allowed the application to proceed, that the potential benefits of the scheme, affordable housing, etc., outweighed the real but very small risk attached. I would say the same for this more modest but welcome scheme. Tadley needs more build to happen to allow our young people to stay in the area, for the more elderly to downsize to, and this site would be ideal. It's available and it's in a sustainable location. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right. Debate, Councillor Leeks.
Sorry, Chair, I thought we were all in debate at the moment, but I've got no questions as such. I have to say, quite a lot I'm going to say is being said, but there's been a few bits. We do need more housing in the area. We do need smaller units, and I hope that Hampshire County Council would look at this. We have an aged population where people are staying in larger units because they can't find smaller units in the area, and after all, if you've lived there quite some years, you'd want to be moving away. You don't make friends so much in those days as you do when your children are younger, and so we do need smaller units. The proposed site is near a community centre, shops, doctors, post office, banks, dentists, vets, churches, and soon a youth club, which I'm not sure if the elderly would want to go to a youth club, but there we are. And the other thing I'll just say is I would be worried if we didn't have so many staff who work at AWE living in the town. If they all moved away, I'd think there was something to worry about. But they don't. They live in the town, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a good omen. And certainly some of their senior staff in the past, and I think are still living in locally. So yes, I think it's got a lot going for it, this site.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, reminding ourselves that this is an outline application, and the more detailed discussions about the type of units that might be provided there would come were we to approve this evening. Which, to be frank, I'd like us to do. It seems to me that I know our officers are, I think, are absolutely obligated to make the recommendation that they have in these circumstances for all the reasons I think we know, obviously in terms of you know, the various authorities that impose conditions upon this. But in terms of, I think, a decision that we can take in terms of the balance of risk as against the benefit that can accrue by this being given approval, I'd like to see it approved, and I'd be happy to put that forward, Chairman, as a recommendation to the committee.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. As an ex-resident of 15 years of Tadley, I have to agree that I think the risk from the AWE and any exposure to radiation is extremely slight. I actually think that there is a greater risk from being gridlocked through lack of infrastructure going through all the traffic lights that they have there. And I would hope that you know, maybe something would be done about that as part of this development. Thank you, Chair.
Any more? Someone, you in a second. Councillor Tate.
If there are no other comments, I would like to formally put forward that we accept this proposal.
You second. Councillor Potter.
And then I second Councillor Potter.
Great, thank you. Mike, you want a word? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to hopefully assist the committee in terms of, you know, appreciate the vote is yet to happen, but in terms of trying to capture a potential reason for approval, on the basis that it sounds as if the committee understands the risks associated with the development as is, and what weight to put to that, but effectively that there are benefits which outweigh that in the balancing act. And listening to debate, my understanding of those benefits are the contribution to housing supply, the provision of affordable housing, the use of previously developed land, and the fact that the development in itself is considered sustainable, and that effectively all other planning matters, so normal reasons for approval, have been met as well.
Anybody want to wish to add that to that? We have a proposal and a second. Shall we vote for approval? Those in favour? Carried unanimously. That vote is. Those against? No, carried. No.
Councillor, if I just address a couple of comments, then we've got obviously a reason for approval. Now, bearing in mind that the ONR are effectively an adjunct of the HSC, what I would suggest is that the recommendation be the applicant be granted subject to the following. So, a consultation with ONR. They have 21 days to take on board any calling requirements that they may undertake. If they're happy enough that we can go ahead, then we've obviously got a legal agreement to be entered into in accordance with SIL and the SAY policies E1, C1, C2, C7, C9 and A2, so it's a straightforward legal contributions, and then subject to the following conditions. I have a number of headings that I think I'd better read out, Councillor, to make sure that we're all happy. So the headings would be subject to plan numbers, time limits. This is an outline application, so reserve matters application time limits as well. Clearly a link back to the principles and parameters that are set by to be set within the submitted detail, materials, levels, tree protection during construction and retention, and integration into the reserve matters applications, maximum of 2-storey development on site, hours of delivery stroke construction, any contaminated land issues, biodiversity conditions, habitat enhancement, wildlife protection, mitigation, a series of highways conditions including phasing of the scheme, phasing details, principles of design and access, construction traffic management plan, hours of work, deliveries, means of access, emergency access, surface water drainage, external and street lighting, footway stroke cycleway, junction improvements, infrastructure upgrades, lifetime homes, soft and hard landscaping, survey, dust, and obviously an informative with regard to the local highway authority and local flooding authority. Car parking to meet standards and to be used or available and no other purpose. Garages to meet internal standards permanently retained for that purpose. Landscaping, hard and soft, and a maintenance strip management plan. We're suggesting removal of permitted development rights for extensions and freestanding buildings. We're also suggesting removal of permitted development rights for no built form to be erected, installed or laid in on, over or under the landscape areas. Reserve matters to comply with Safe Policy C3 housing mix, lifetime mobility standards SPD with particular regard to provision of appropriate housing mix, 15% market dwellings being built to lifetime mobility standards, boundary treatments, all dwellings reaching level 3 of the Code for Sustainable Homes, and then finally we'd suggest, obviously it's down to the ONR, they may well make recommendations for conditions in lieu of the approval, and we'd suggest possibly that could be delegated to officers. Sorry Chair, long list, but...
Thank you. I challenge members to add or take away from that one. Right, and a slight change to the agenda now. We're going to take item number 6 next. So Messrs Young, Copock and Macmillan here. Thank you. I will ask them to speak in a minute. The officer, Mark Turner, will present, and the public speakers will be followed by Councillor Keating. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is item number 6. It's on page 93 of the agenda. Site address is 197 Old Worting Road, Basingstoke. The proposal is for the erection of 1 2-bedroom bungalow with attached garage and the creation of a new crossover access. Chair, the report has been circulated to members and I don't believe we have an update. No, I've got nothing on the update for this, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Mr Young, first, please. You will have 4 minutes, Mr Young, and I'll give you a reminder when there's one to go.
Sorry, can I just clarify, Chair? After Mr Young's spoken, I will have the opportunity.
You have an opportunity. You're the ward member, aren't you?
Yes, thank you.
You get 4 minutes as well.
There's a huge mature fir tree in 197 that's very close to my house, and when this is removed it could possibly undermine my foundations, causing my property to subside. Information from RHS website: trees close to buildings, tree legislation. A tree is the property and responsibility of the landowner, who may be liable for any damage caused. Structural damage caused by subsidence. This is generally only a problem on shrinkable clay soils, Buildings up to 4 stories constructed before 1950s are most at risk, and they frequently have foundations only 50 centimetres deep. My house was built in 1927. Cause. Just how can tree roots cause problems? During prolonged periods of drought, trees can further dry out the soil to the extent that clay soil will shrink. This can result in subsidence and structural cracking, particularly around windows and doors. Tree roots are unlikely to directly penetrate sound footings, but can exploit any cracks or faults, perhaps caused by soil shrinkage or heave, thereby compounding the problem as they extend and expand. It's not always the case that removing a tree that is contributing to subsidence problems will make the problems disappear, although the soil usually swells each winter. A permanent moisture deficit can build up under certain circumstances that result in significant swelling of the soil after the tree is removed and soil generally returns to its previously moist state. This is called heave and can result in serious damage unless it's controlled by careful soil management. Potential heave is very hard to detect and predict. Our property is surrounded by mature trees that have been here for a long time, some as old as our house. The proposed application of 197 will change all this. Note 3, reasons for approval. I would not result in any undue loss of privacy. Property being 1 metre from my fence and all trees removed would be a loss of privacy and light. The proposed bungalow, which is huge, is to be built just 1 metre from my boundary, when the width of the plot of 197 is 100 foot wide. This property is 5.8 metres high for a bungalow, and this will cut out light from my garden. The bungalow could be positioned in the centre of the plot so that it is equal distance from adjacent properties. Could the access right be positioned on the left-hand side of 197? Old word, you know. This way there would be no need for additional access and all the trees on my boundary could remain.
1 minute to go.
It's all right.
You finished?
Yeah, finished.
Okay.
Any questions for Mr. Young? Members. Councillor Bowen, followed by Councillor Potter.
Could I just clarify which house you live on in terms...
199.
Councillor Potter?
Thank you, Chairman. Hello, Mr. Chairman. That's the first part of what I was going to ask as well. But in regard to the particular tree that you've referred to, am I absolutely clear in saying that actually is on the within the boundary of 197? So, sorry, let me just finish the question. So clearly the owner of that property could take that tree down at any time, irrespective of any backland development, is that right?
Screen. It's the rear tree.
Rear tree.
It's the tree at the back.
It's a huge tree. It's about almost 50 foot tall. Yeah, and also the roots of trees would expand by a factor of 3 times their height.
Councillor Potter, are you?
Sorry, it's tautology, really. I mean, the point I was trying to make was that clearly I know how concerned you are about that, but the simple legal position would be the owner could take that tree down if he or she chose to do that of their own free will, irrespective of any development they had in mind. That's right, isn't it?
That's true, but he would be liable, would he not, if something happened to my property, correct?
Right. Any other questions for Mr. Young? Right, thank you both very much. You, Councillor, you'll speak after the co-pox. Yeah. That's the order of the thing, if you can do that. Thanks. Mr. and Mrs. Copock? And Mr. Copock and Mr. McMillan. You will have 4 minutes between you, and I'll give you notice of 1 minute to go.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, committee, good evening. I'm David Coppock. I'm the applicant here, and I live at 197 Old Worthing Road, and we've lived in Worthing Road for 38 years. We like living there, and we wouldn't do anything to harm it in any way at all. However, we're getting older, and we're underutilising the 4-bedroom property, and need to find a more suitable home for the future that we can remain living independently in while we get frailer. So our objective in this application was to build a 2-bedroom home for ourselves that would only be suitable for ourselves, but would improve the area both now and in the future. So learning from previous applications, we informed the neighbours as early as we started thinking about it, of the idea, and looked around the local area to outline a home design that fits with the existing built environment. And garages on the boundary, and there are already plenty of properties built within 1 metre of property boundary. So we've obtained support from planning right the way through, from pre-planning and continuously throughout their protests, and because we were informed that it's in line with local planning policy. So we've kept our neighbours informed, and we have ensured that they have access to the plans. I consulted my regular tree maintenance surgeon, who was saying that there wouldn't be too much of an issue to take down the trees, and as has already been pointed out by committee, I can take them down as and when. Quite a few of my neighbours are supportive, but others have expressed concerns, as we've heard this evening already. And to mitigate their concerns, we've offered a tree planting scheme that's intended to improve the outlook, their privacy, and also absorb more CO2. So the trees we take down, we'll put more up. Quite willing to do that. So in summary, then, we're here this evening asking for your support in enhancing the area in the short and the long term, support in building an eco-home for the future, support in releasing a 4-bedroom family home, and support in improving the local housing stock, and support in getting more trees. There's any foundation issues, I don't believe, before this committee, we'll sort out as part of any build that goes on. Can I hand you over to a colleague?
Yes, hello. My name's Cameron McMillan. I'm acting as the applicant's agent on behalf of Scandia House Limited. Scandia House have been a company around for 40 years now. We have a lot of experience in designing and building eco-friendly homes, high specification and individual homes for individual people. We're not developers. I would just like to state that the application has been submitted following positive pre-app feedback submitted last year. The planning officer, Peter Tanner, concluded in the pre-app that the principle of development in this location, in essence, would be acceptable, subject to careful design and siting. The design, size, mass, bulk, height...
1 minute to go.
...has all been carefully thought through and forms the basis of the application. And the application meets with all the local relevant and national planning policies. It's acceptable to the tree officer, the environment, health and highways as well. The 6 identical letters that have been submitted are obviously to trigger it to be seen by the committee, but obviously it was due to be approved under delegated powers by the planning officer, and I would like to see that the committee can uphold perhaps his decision. Some of the objections that have come through seem to be resolved mainly around the tree, and it has already been stated a couple of times now that the tree in question, all trees, could actually be removed regardless of the development in the back garden anyway. And the foul drains will be connected into the foul sewer within the ground, the curtilage of the application site. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, any questions, members, for either Mr McMillan or Mr Coppock? Councillor Potter.
I wonder if I could just ask either or both. I mean, I know this has been the subject of pre-app discussions, and obviously you've given some careful consideration. One of the points Mr Young made, I think with some justification, really, put it in my own way, but is there any absolute need for the gable wall of the new property to be quite so close to the boundary of your land and his? I mean, it seems to me with a plot of that width, there's a fair amount of scope there, and that could make quite a considerable difference. Is there an absolute logic in having a metre away from the boundary fence?
No, the logic was looking around the property that was already there. 199 is already built to within a metre of the boundary, and there are garages on other boundaries. So it was really the brief that was issued was to build something that fits in the local area. I had a conversation with Mr. Young on Saturday morning, and that came up that said, look, what if it's moved a bit? And he said he would be happier, but he wouldn't be happy. But I don't know technically how that would fit in with planning or whatever, but there isn't an absolute need for it to be that close to the boundary, no.
Any more questions for either of these gentlemen? Good. Thank you very much indeed then. Councillor Keating. You have 4 minutes, and I'll give you notice of one left.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, I'm here to support Mr. Young in his objection to the building of a bungalow in the backyard of an established, seriously old house in Basingstoke. Old Worthing Road is one of the most mature roads of houses in Southam. Most of Southam was built in the 1950s and 60s and constituted effectively a council housing estate. Old Worthing Road was the through road from town out to Overton and beyond. There were substantial houses along that road, and they are substantial, and they have effectively been protected in the main. Old Worthing Road has two parts. Part one is a through route through into the council housing estate, up as far as what I know as the Hammer and Tongs. It's an old pub established in Basingstoke. Beyond the Hammer and Tongs, it's a cul-de-sac road. It's a totally different character in that cul-de-sac. But Old Worthing Road, as you'll see on the plan that you have in page 104, you'll see the back gardens of all the adjacent houses. There are no buildings in those gardens, and there would never normally be, because they are substantial houses of the old character, and they project an image of Basingstoke as was by the landed gentry. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but if you want to totally change the character of that part of Old Worthing Road, you'll give permission. If you recognise and value the character of Old Worthing Road as it is, then you should refuse this application. It's a premier road in Southam, I can assure you. Mr. Young has obviously lived there quite a long time, and he feels very strongly about this, and I understand that. I'm objecting as a local councillor because it will undermine and change the character of the road, not just the one house. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, questions? Councillor Hussey.
Sorry, Sean. The plan on the back of page 103.
This one?
No, the one before it.
Okay, well, this is the one I meant.
Yeah, but the one before it, please. Look.
You mean the one after it?
Oh, sorry, I mean that one. Sorry, Sean. It shows the gap between 199 and 197 is far more than a metre. Whereas the...
It's in that spot.
No, sorry, the gap between house number 199 and the boundary fence looks much greater than 1 metre.
That's a garage there.
So on the plan on the next page, it shows it's got a different layout for 199. Is that a built-on garage? Sorry.
The house of 197 right, which is the existing house where they want to build in the garden, is immediately adjacent to 199, which is Mr. Young's house. Mr. Young's house is more or less up against the boundary line, and the tree is inside that boundary line in terms of the neighbour's house, but it is a substantial tree, and if anybody cuts it down, it will obviously have a significant impact on the house because it's so close. But the point I'm making, if I may say so, to the committee, all the adjacent houses all do not have other bungalows in their backyards because it's not the character of the street. And people who live and know Old Basing, people who live and know Chinham and other established substantial parts of Basingstoke which have character will understand the point I'm making. Thank you.
Any more questions for Councillor Keating? Yeah, okay, right. Councillor Tate, followed by Councillor Leeks, followed by Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chair.
It's not me, you don't have to attack me.
No, it's just a question, Sean. In you're saying that the environment of this road would be changed by this application. 199 and 199A and 187 and A and B sort of imply to me, and I have to say I don't know the road, but they imply that in the past those addresses have already been split down. Would that be correct? But how does that work in real terms then? Because normally when you have 199, 199A, there is an address which has become two addresses by previous, it's not particularly relevant. I just want to understand how that works.
I'm sorry, Chair, I don't know the answer to your question.
I can answer that question if I can. My house originally...
No, I'm sorry, you can't.
All right.
Councillor Leeks. Councillor Band.
Yes, it goes back to Councillor Hussey's point. Has 199 got a garage built on the side of it, quite close to the fence?
If I may say, it doesn't have a garage, it has an annex. Yeah, where people live.
Councillor Frost? Who's pointing at me? Any more questions? Thank you, Councillor Keating. Questions to officers? Councillor Leeks.
Us little country folk, which tree are we talking about? Are we talking about the one there there's a post right next to it? Or are we talking about the one that's further to the left?
Councillor, I believe it's the one on the absolute edge nearest to the annex on the neighbouring property. That's the one that's the cause for concern. But to reiterate, it's not protected. It could be removed today. Any damage caused is between both. It's a civil matter between both parties.
Any more questions for officers? No, we'll therefore go to debate. Any proposals? Councillor Potter.
Sorry, can I just take half a step back? I do beg your pardon, Chairman, if I may. In terms of officer advice, can I just be reminded in terms of MPPF policy in regard to what I describe as backland development? We've had this elsewhere. And in terms of the sort of situation we're facing here, and as I say, we've had it elsewhere, in terms of what the MPPF says about the development of, in most cases, large rear gardens for additional dwellings, could I just have that clarified for me,
Yes.
please?
Mark?
Is that possible?
Yes.
Yes, Councillor. Effectively, the MPPF specifically excludes rear gardens from the definition of previously developed land. So it is no longer considered as previously developed. This is undeveloped land. Notwithstanding that, we then move to Basingstoke and Dean's local plan, our development plan policies, and we have no policies that specifically relate to backland development. So what we have to look at is the impact and the harm that arises, and we obviously have policies that relate to that. So I think the answer is we don't have policy one way or the other with regard to backland development. We do have specific policies for you to consider with regard to the harm arising from any development, and that's what we look at. So I think the officers concluded here there is no in principle objection to the proposed development, but the proposal needs to be considered within this policy context and based upon material planning considerations, i.e. the development plan.
Any more? Councillor Hussey.
I'd like to continue on the last theme. I'm obviously out of touch, but I thought that a few years ago, 5 years ago, that gardens were taken out of brownfield category. And that was for one specific objective. And it was really about, it was referred to as garden grabbing at the time. Is that what you were referring to, David? That you were asking questions about? Because I'd like an answer on that, please.
Yes, Councillor, that's effectively where I was coming from. Ultimately, there was a point in time where gardens were considered to be previously developed land, and then with change in policy and the NPPF, they are no longer considered as previously developed land. Therefore, we treat them as undeveloped. There are no policies specific to this council with regard to developing undeveloped land. Therefore, we have to consider the other policies that we have. For example, what harm is there, what impact arises from the development. So you're absolutely right, there was a point in time where gardens were considered up for grabs, garden grabbing. That was taken away. The definition of developed land, they were taken out of that definition. That doesn't mean to say it can't be developed, it just means to say we have to consider other policies.
Can you correct me here, but I thought our policies predated 2010, so we wouldn't have policies.
No, but effectively, so when the NPPF was published and made this change, then effectively as the emerging local plan comes forward, there's an opportunity to bring forward new policies which would address that particular issue about backland development. In essence, the emerging local plan would be the time to bring forward such a policy if the council decided to. But as Mr Turner rightly states, the change is to do with the definition of previously developed land. It's not a policy position to say that backland development cannot happen. It's simply a case that it's not now previously developed land. That's the only change.
Councillor Potter.
Can I just ask one other thing? Careful with my words, if I may, really, because I know the work that's gone into this in terms of pre-app discussions between the applicant, obviously, and officers on this. But coming back to the point that I have raised in terms of the proximity of the proposed dwelling to the boundary line, I understand, of course, the point that's made that 199 with its annex is just about as close to the existing boundary as this one is proposed. Nonetheless, this is a new dwelling. It obviously will have an impact upon the rear garden of 199 in terms of its location and proximity. Is there any scope, or must we consider this application entirely in its own right, specifically what's in front of us? It just seems to me that some discretion there, some compromise might be helpful to what we actually are being asked to consider. I don't know if I put that discreetly enough, but that's the point I'm trying to make, really.
Yes, Councillor, I take on board where you're coming from. I think it's incumbent upon yourselves to consider the planning application as submitted and in front of you. As much as it may be desirable to consider potential alternatives or shifting development one way or the other, it's really upon you to consider what's here and obviously whether there's a harm arising from what's been proposed.
Right, members. Do I have any proposals or opinions or further? Councillor Hussey.
Under reasons for approval, number 1, we're quoting policy E1, and there's a précis of policy E1 within the reason for approval. But it's cut short because it says street pattern plot size layout, whereas E1 says spacing rather than layout, and it also says reinforce attractive qualities of local distinctiveness. That's what policy E1 says. Well, this development certainly doesn't achieve that. It is in a rear garden. And if we look at the properties on the other side, 195, 193, if they were to get together, they could provide a plot of an equal size to the rear of 197 for the application site, and we could have another bungalow there. And I just think that here we are talking about rear garden development squeezing in and changing the character. The character isn't just the street scene, the character is the layout of this traditional area of old houses. I'll be coming back to this theme later on in another application, because it does materially change the nature and the character of the area by having infill, back garden grabbing basically, or backyard as Councillor Keating calls it. So I would propose that we refuse the application.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Taylor.
I appreciate all the arguments that have been put forward against it, and I have some sympathy with the neighbour. But I mean, as I look at this particular plot of land, the size of it, etc., I can't see any sound planning reasons for turning it down. I think it is an acceptable size. It might not be in an ideal position, but as we've been advised, this is the one we're looking at. And I mean, there would be room on this site to have two completely new houses side by side, but I think probably this will be preferable to that. And so I think, in fact, I will be supporting approval.
Any seconders to either of those proposed? Councillor Leeks, you will second it. Let's take a vote on approval first. Those in favour of approval? Okay. Those against? 4. 4 against. That means it's approved. I'll ask officer to give us conditions.
Thank you, Chair. The recommended conditions are as listed.
Okay, thank you. Right, now we move back to item number 3. Sorry, 2. Trying to speed the thing up. Item number 1. That is 100 Homesteads Road, and I have got Mr. Watling and Mr. Whitmarsh to speak, and it will be Officer Trevor Campbell-Smith will start it off. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the demolition of the existing bungalow on the site at 100 Homesteads Road and the erection of 8 dwellings on the plot. The application is before the committee with a recommendation for approval, and with regard to the update paper, there's just a couple of small errors that have been made with regard to the report. One is that condition 25 listed should be numbered as condition 23. There shouldn't be a gap between 22 and 25 at all. And also, should note that informative number 5 on the list of recommended informatives is in fact a duplication of number 6, so therefore we'd want to remove informative number 6.
Thank you. Right. Mr. Watling, followed by Mr. Whitmarsh. Thank you. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Watling, and I'll give you notice of 1 remaining.
Chairman, Chairman Committee, my name is Graham Watling and I live at Wickfield in Homestead Road. The bungalow at Homestead Road has remained empty for 3 years and is now in a very poor condition. It is an eyesore and has unfortunately become an attraction to undesirable characters in our society. Enhancement of this site in a manner that is in keeping with this attractive location and not have a detrimental impact on the residents and users of this part of Homestead Road would therefore be welcomed. It is felt that the density of dwellings is excessive, with the proposed construction of 8 houses representing a density of 32 dwellings per hectare, compared with a density of just 20 for existing properties in this road. This plot is an integral part of Homestead Road and as such should respect the character of its surroundings. It is also felt that the Homestead Road building line should be respected in the same manner as existing properties have had to comply in the past. 3 of the dwellings in the proposal are forward of this building line, a consequence of an attempt to overdevelop the site. The layout of the proposed development will lead to a loss of privacy for number 96 and Wickfield. The upper rooms of dwellings 5, 6, 7 and 8 will overlook the garden of number 96, and the upper rooms of dwellings 1, 2, 3 and 4 will overlook the conservatory, the dining room and garden of Wickfield. This will have an impact on the quiet enjoyment of these adjacent properties, much of which could be avoided with the introduction of bungalows as part of the mix. This would be in keeping with the existing mix of buildings. The proposal requires the removal of an established ash tree to the east of the site. In order to simplify the planning process, approximately 200 trees were removed from the site before the planning application was submitted, so it is felt that any further loss should be avoided. A major concern is the impact that this development will have on the local residents and users of this no-through road section of Homestead Road. The road in question is not a cul-de-sac, as it is a designated cycle route and used by both cyclists and pedestrians for access to and from Hatch Warren, Brighton Hill and Kempshott via the Pelican Crossing on Winchester Road. Pedestrians are currently able to enjoy a safe and relatively traffic-free walk from Winchester Road to the top of Homestead Road, despite the absence of a footpath. The proposed development will significantly increase traffic movements and vehicle parking in this section of the road and put at risk the safety of pedestrians and cyclists. The applicant has proposed a short footpath be constructed in front of the site between the bottom of the road and the footpath leading to Rose Close.
1 minute to go.
In the belief that pedestrians will walk to the top of Homestead Road via Rose Close and Jasmine Road. This will not happen. Pedestrians will continue to walk in the road as they do now. The high-density housing that is proposed, despite the designated parking positions provided, will inevitably lead to Homestead Road and the turning area adjacent to Rose Close being used for overflow parking. This will be detrimental and hazardous to all users of the road and create problems for heavy goods vehicles needing to turn round before exiting the road. It is therefore recommended that the proposed development be modified with a lower density of housing, more in keeping with the existing 2-storey, 1.5-storey and single-storey properties. This would enhance the area and have significantly less impact upon the users of Homestead Road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watling. Now, members, questions for Mr. Watling? No, Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, just looking on our block plan, which you probably haven't got in front of you, but right along adjacent to the plot, it says Rose Close, but I believe that's your private drive that's immediately adjacent, and Rose Close is the next one to it. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Any more questions? Then thank you, Mr. Watling. Right, Mr. Whitmarsh next, please. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Whitmarsh, and I'll give you notice of one remaining.
Thank you. My name is David Whitmarsh. I'm from Goodall Barnard Construction, the applicant. I wish to respond to some of the points that have just been raised, many of which are dealt with in the officer's report. Specifically, the building relationships that are proposed between the new dwellings and the existing buildings at number 96 and at Wickfield. I believe in the officer's report it is acknowledged that they are acceptable in the context of new development. It is mentioned that there are additional hazards to pedestrians and cyclists in this part of Homesteads Road that would result from the development. I would point out that it is a vehicular cul-de-sac which has a direct impact upon the speed of vehicles that use this part of Homesteads Road, and that currently there are 7 dwellings which use this part of Homesteads Road. That will double to 14. But in highways terms, these numbers are low. And I believe it is reasonable, bearing in mind this is at the end of a vehicular cul-de-sac, that vehicles accessing this site will be going slowly. Nonetheless, we do acknowledge that there will be additional vehicle movements entering and leaving the proposed new access driveway, and so for that reason we are proposing a new public footpath across the frontage of the site, so that there is appropriate refuge, if you like, for pedestrians using this part of Homesteads Road. In terms of density, we feel that it's reasonable to look at this site in somewhat isolation from the remainder of Homesteads Road. It is separated from the remaining developed part of Homesteads Road by the footpath, the public footpath to Rose Close, and the existing private drive to Wickfield. We think that it has an identity of its own. It relates to Rose Close as well as to Homesteads Road in terms of its form and layout. And whilst it is true that some of the 3 dwellings at the front of the site are closer to Homesteads Road than that which exists further up the road, we don't believe that that's unreasonable in the context of this site as it stands. I think those are the points that I wanted to address. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Members, have we got questions for Mr. Whitmarsh? Councillor Potter.
Sorry, hello. If I've missed this in the detail, correct me. In terms of the boundary between the end of the hammerhead of the proposed cul-de-sac into this new development and the Wickfield property, is there any proposal there in terms of suitable screening and the like? I mean, I don't know what discussions have taken place on that. Excuse me, but in terms of the long length of the garden area of Wickfield, is there anything that you're proposing?
Discussions have taken place with the adjoining owner prior to submission of the planning application, and it was requested that the original proposal to erect a 1.8 metre high close boarded fence along that boundary be amended to a 2 metre high close boarded fence in order to protect the privacy of Wickfield. And I certainly am quite happy to accede to that request, and I believe that the plan you're looking at should have the reference to a 2 metre high fence. I don't have it in front of me. And certainly I anticipate that there will be a landscaping condition attached to this consent, if it is given, and I would expect a landscaping scheme to address that point also, in terms of, if it is possible to do so, planting some trees, which will add further privacy.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I noticed that there's going to be a tree protection plan, that you plan to retain some trees and remove others. Could you just tell me if you plan to keep the very, very tall trees that are at the corner of the site adjacent to the A30? They look like Scotch pines or something to me, although I'm not an expert on these things. Very, very distinctive and attractive trees. At the end of Homesteads Road, just as you get to the cul-de-sac, just on the corner there, on the right-hand side, there are some very, very tall, interesting-looking Scotch pine-type trees. Are you planning to keep those?
I believe I'm right in saying that one or two of those trees are not in our ownership. They are in adjacent properties. Certainly, it is our intention to remove from the A30 boundary and part of the boundary with Wickfield a number of underdeveloped conifer trees which are frankly unstable following the removal about 2 or 3 years ago of a large body of trees from within the site. A number of the remaining trees around the fringe have been blown down in the storms of last winter, and it is our intention to take the remainder of that fringe of tall spindly trees out, frankly because I think they are unsafe. But I think the trees that you're referring to are on the adjacent property and not our own. The other tree that I will refer to, since we're on the subject of trees, there is an ash tree at the front of the site, frontage with Homesteads Road, which is in fact on highways land. It's not land that we own, but our proposal includes a new public footpath, as I referred to earlier, and I think any form of development of this site would require a public footpath. That's based upon advice from the council's highways officer. So any form of development of this site would require a public footpath, and in order for that public footpath to be constructed, the ash tree will need to be removed. And so it is our proposal to take that out as well.
Any more questions? Then thank you very much. We move on. Right, members, questions to officers? Not a drum was heard, not a funeral note. Okay, Councillor Frost.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I unfortunately wasn't able to make the site visit, but I did go around at the weekend. I'm just a bit confused with all the trees that have been removed. Are any of those trees at all under protection orders?
Councillor Frost, there are no TPOs in force on the site, and the site is not within a conservation area, so none of those trees are under any form of statutory protection.
Thank you, Chair.
Any more? Then debate. Do we have some proposals or some discussion? Councillor Taylor.
I visited the site today. I have to agree it's ripe for development. It's a very derelict bungalow on it, and it's a good sized plot. And the reason I was asking about the trees was it gives a nice natural screening to the A30, which obviously runs across one side of it. I was looking, I walked down Rose Close and looked at number 9 Rose Close, and that to me is a typical Kempshott detached house, and it's on what I would think is just about the smallest plot you'd want for such a house. If you compare that to the plots and the size of the houses on the proposal, the proposed houses are bigger on smaller plots, and for that reason I think I would agree with the objector and say that I think this is an overdevelopment of this particular site. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 houses here is completely out of keeping with Homesteads Road. I would prefer to see, and I think it would be much more in keeping to see just 3 houses in line with the housing line along Homesteads Road, and they would be pretty much equivalent plots of land for each of those 3 houses. And I think then it would have far less impact on Wickfield, which is quite drastically affected by this. And I think this would be a much more acceptable proposal than what's in front of us now.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
I mean, I know this area as well, and agreeing with Councillor Taylor, I mean, we're actually talking about 8 units here, not 7 even, aren't we? And to that extent, I think it is over dense in regard to the site in question. I mean, I'm not prescribing exactly what the number should be, but certainly 8 is too many, I believe, in terms of the and being consistent, I think, with the development around. And I think, obviously, the point was made, I think, by the objector really about the moving some of these dwellings forward beyond the building line that's been established over a long time. With the sort of amendment that I'd like to see, we'd come back to that, and whether it's 3 or 4, I'm not sure. I don't want to speculate. That's not clearly part of my brief this evening, but certainly I think this is over dense, and on that basis I would oppose the application.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Tomlin.
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to pick up on one point. I'm counting 7 houses and 8 in the... Oh, it's two. One's I beg your pardon. Thank you.
Councillor Potter, are you proposing refusal?
Sorry, Chair, as usual, I'm happy to have a go. And I think Councillor Taylor was with me on that, so I've got a seconder. And it would, you know, it goes without saying, it's primarily on the basis that I believe there's these proposals are too dense, too cluttered in regard to the site in question, inconsistent, I think, probably with the character of the area in regard to substantial detached properties on a building line already established. It's a bit incoherent probably what I've said, but I mean that's the line of what we'd be seeking to say, I think, Chairman.
Yeah, and the street scene and...
Yeah, I mean, having said all of that, I mean, I do express the same views that others have said, and this is a site that needs redevelopment. There's no doubt that it's been derelict for too long, and I commend the people that want to do something with it, but not on this basis, and I think further thought should go into it.
Thank you. Right, members, we have a proposer and seconder for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? That vote is carried. Those against?
Thank you, Chair. The application is refused. With regard to reason for refusal, what I'm picking up from the committee is that it is considered the proposed development is too dense and would constitute an overdevelopment of the site, would be out of character with that of the area, and would be of detriment to the street scene. Am I picking up those points correctly?
Yes, yes.
Breaks the building lines.
Yeah.
And also would project forward of the building line. Okay. Thank you, members.
Right, we now move on to item number 3, which is 15 West Street, Tadley, and I have one person speaking, Natalie Smith, in support, and officer presenting is Mark Turner. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is on page 42 of the agenda. 15 West Street, Tadley, Hampshire. The proposals for the erection of 1 3-bed detached dwelling and 1 4-bed detached dwelling with garages following the demolition of an existing bungalow and includes the creation of a new access. The report's obviously been circulated. In terms of update, I have one additional letter of objection has been received. It is summarised as proposals are not in keeping with the surrounding properties and there would be a possibility of overlooking into neighbouring gardens. While the additional objection is noted, it's considered these issues have already been addressed in the main report, therefore no modifications or changes to the recommendation or the report are required. Just so that you're aware, Chair, it would appear that Lamados, which is dwelling directly to the south of the proposal site, is currently being in the process of being sold. During the conveyancing, the potential purchaser has become aware of this application, their solicitor, I presume it's a conveyancing solicitor, has raised a query with regard to perceived discrepancies between the red line plan as submitted to the planning authority and the Land Registry Office copy entry plan. We've been provided with an older version of the office copy entry, and we have compared it with the red line and a newer version of it. There is a discrepancy. Notwithstanding that, the discrepancy is minor. It would obviously be a civil matter. It's effectively a boundary type dispute and does not affect the officer's recommendation. With regard to potential notification and certificate Bs, etc., clearly the occupants of Lamados were notified of this application in any event, and the potential purchaser is aware because they've contacted us. So I don't think there's any discussion of prejudice in terms of who knew what was happening at this stage. That's all I've got for this, Chair.
Thank you, Mark.
Are we looking at a vast difference, or just a couple of inches, or what?
Natalie Smith, please. You will have 4 minutes, and I'll give you notice of one remaining.
Hi, everybody. Okay, my name is Natalie, and I'm here tonight just to represent Roland Hopkins, who unfortunately can't make it tonight. He's away on holiday, so he does apologise. But I'm the owner of 15 West Street, and we've been, my husband and I and my two sons, we've lived there all our lives in Tadley, and my parents still live there, and so do my husband's parents. We just live round the corner at the moment from 15 West Street. We bought it 18 months ago, and we're looking to demolish it and build 2 family homes. We want to live in one of the family homes with our children, and we want to keep our families in Tadley. We went to the local schools, the Bishop's Road, Burnham Copse, the Hurst, and so did our children. So we're looking to possibly build the second family home for our sons. We've got two older sons at the moment who are struggling to get onto the property ladder. So we feel that we want to stay in Tadley, and we want to be able to possibly give them not give them a home, but provide some local home, either if it not to them, to some other family. We feel that we want our families and local people to be encouraged to stay in and around Tadley. West Street itself is a lovely street. The properties there are all slightly different. There are a couple of, there's actually 3 new houses that have been built next door to my plot, and we feel that looking at the style of the 2 family homes that we would like to build, you know, we will try our utmost to keep them in keeping regarding what is already existing there. We've spoken to a lot of the neighbours and we have taken on board, comments as to what style and what material is going to be used. We did amend the plans slightly so that the houses would come forward, because there was a concern of overlooking into La Mardos house in their garden, but we've just dealt with that.
1 minute to go.
Okay, so it is a lovely area. We want our children to stay with us, and we don't want to move away, and we want to provide 2 family homes to enjoy. Regarding the trees and the plants and the shrubs that are there, there's lots of lovely wildlife, and we want to keep as much of the hedgerow, and we will be keeping as much as the hedgerow and of the shrubs and the plants as possible because of all the lovely wildlife that's there. And we were even going to ask if we could maybe put some bat boxes up or bird boxes just to keep the wildlife in. And we totally understand people's concerns. There's an old bungalow there at the moment, and we're proposing to put 2 family homes on there, but we feel like we have addressed all the concerns, and we feel that you will feel that we can go ahead with the build. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from Mrs. Smith?
Oh.
Mrs. Councillor Taylor.
Just one quick one. You mentioned that there were going to be 3 houses built on the plot next to yours. Is that at number 13? And has that permission been granted? Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Any more questions? No questions? Right, thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions to officers? No? No, you're quite right. Ward councillor? Debate, Ward councillor.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad we're not going to be giving planning permission for bat boxes or owl box or anything else. They go to somewhere else, but I've got no problems with this. I've had nobody ring me up about it, and I'm happy to move the recommendation. Hang on, let's just check. Yeah, move the recommendation. Granted. Thank you very much, Chair.
Right, we move to vote. We have a President and Seconder for approval. Those in favour? Unanimous. Right, thank you very much for that. We move on to item number 4. Oh, yes, sorry, I forgot about conditions.
Sorry, Chair. Just to clarify, conditions as listed, I presume, with the approval?
Thank you. Item number 4, which is Stoke Lodge residential home at Clidston Road, Basingstoke. Officer will present it, and I have one objector in the form of Mrs. Townsend Rose, who will speak afterwards. Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. As stated, this is an application at Stoke Lodge residential home at number 85 Clidston Road. It's an application for the erection of a detached annex to the rear of Stoke Lodge. And that would take the form of 2 sort of semi-independent bungalows type thing, semi-detached bungalow type building in the rear garden. As the application is before members with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Trevor. Right, Mrs. Townsend Rose. You will have 4 minutes, and I'll give you notice of 1 remaining.
Thank you. I've been asked to speak on behalf of Clidston Road Residents Association. There are 4 concerns we'd like to raise. They're noise, car parking and movements, precedent and visual intrusion. This residential home for adults with severe learning difficulties and challenging antisocial behaviour has had quite an impact locally. This is because the residents are prone to loud repetitive vocalisations and easily become very distressed and enraged, leading to extremely noisy and violent tantrums. Both police and ambulances are regularly seen outside the home. A home for such high-risk, difficult people should never have been located in an urban domestic street with close neighbours, but it is where it is and we deal with the situation as best we can. Making it even bigger, a 22% increase, will surely add to noise and disturbance which has already been experienced by neighbours. We have at times been able to enjoy even 10 peaceful minutes in our garden. Hard, sharp items such as stones, lumps of mortar or metal have been thrown over the fence. On one occasion a wheelbarrow was thrown into my neighbour's garden. Noise can be audible to households several houses away. We've already experienced plenty of this sort of thing over the years, and therefore we entirely disagree with statements made by officers in reports to you that this development will not cause undue noise or disturbance to neighbours. There has already been unacceptable noise and disturbance. It is admitted by choice that the annex would be used by people with challenging behaviour and complex needs. Our experience tells us this will increase noise and disturbance. Officers state that no complaints have been received regarding noise. In fact, we have complained to Environmental Health about noise and items being thrown into our gardens. We have also complained to Social Services, to the Care Quality Commission and to Choice Care Homes on numerous occasions. And there have been meetings in the past with some of these, one of which Councillor Hussey attended. Complaining is stressful and unpleasant and not something we care to do unless really pushed. Great caution is needed in locating homes such as these, and they should remain small in scale. Catering for 9 people plus staff seems to me to be already quite a big establishment. Enlarging it further is certain to add to the already considerable adverse effects on neighbours. There are noisy deliveries and collection of laundry or clinical waste in the small hours which wake neighbours, so I feel we are already dealing with quite enough noise and disturbance. We take issue with the assertion by officers that there will be no impact on highway safety. The car park is frequently crammed with cars, meaning that vehicles overhang the pavement and other cars are parked on the double yellow lines, sometimes obstructing coaches and buses leaving college. If a car needs to leave, others have to reverse out to allow this. Tradesmen's vans are frequent visitors, adding to the need for staff cars to park on yellow lines. Changing the location of the entrance to the car park is mentioned in the officer's report, but we fail to see how this will make much difference. They will have the same amount of space and still be opposite the college exit. It has been admitted that staff numbers will increase, so more staff, more cars, more coming and going. We also feel the plans could pose an undesirable precedent. Many of us have big gardens and could also build bungalows and provide them with vehicular access. If one person can build a house in their back garden, then why not all? It's stated in the report that occupants of the development will vary during the lifetime of the development. Very true. Who knows what use this and other potential similar buildings could be put to in future. Some residents also fear visual intrusion, as this is quite a large building and may be visible from nearby gardens. So we ask the committee to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Townsend-Rose. Do I have any questions for Mrs. Townsend-Rose? Councillor Hussey, thank you.
Julia, you mentioned that the home is for adults with severe learning difficulties. When Choice said that the annex will be used by people with challenging behaviour and complex needs, did they explain to you how that related to the existing adults with the learning difficulties? Would they be more severe or...?
I haven't had any information from Choice. I took that from the information provided to Council from Officer's report. But I assume that they will be the same as the ones already in the home. When this idea was first mooted, there was something mentioned somewhere about wanting this development in the garden to get people to move towards a more independent type of living. So I thought, well, they'll be more mildly affected. But it would seem from the information provided that that's not the case. They will be challenging and difficult individuals, similar to the ones already in the home.
you're concerned about precedent. Could you expand on that and the nature of Clivison Road?
As was mentioned actually in a previous application, it's a older style road. Most of the houses are late Victorian, early Edwardian, and set in large plots. I think starting to put bungalows and other such buildings into back gardens is completely out of character with the area and would change the area quite a bit. Because the plots are quite big, it would be feasible, and as I mentioned, I think even vehicular access could be provided to these dwellings, so you'd have actually people driving down, could I suppose potentially past other people's gardens to access these, and who knows what might be put into such dwellings. I think it would just hugely change the character of a residential road.
Any more questions for Mrs. Townsend Rose? Right, thank you very much. Questions to officers? Do I have any? No? Yes, thank you. Councillor Tate.
Just a question regarding the parking and the road itself. The reports implies there are no issues as far as the parking size for the building is concerned, but there seem to be a lot of minibuses which are more than one space, and how does I'm not quite sure that this ties up with the picture that has been presented. On the one hand, that there's plenty of parking, and then you look at some of the photography of it with overhanging cars and cars parked on yellow lines, etc.
Yes, Councillor Taylor. I mean, basically, as with any application, we have to assess the level of parking that's required for the unit in accordance with our standard formula. In this particular case, the site, with the increase in staff, would need to provide 7 spaces, and they have provided us with a plan that demonstrates that they are able to do so. For that reason, we don't have any grounds for refusal of the application on that basis.
I take it therefore that the plan you're talking about with the 7 spaces is the one that's in the documents that have been set out, all of which appear to be of the same size. And within that, the photography of the site itself, there is consistent parking of a couple of minibuses, which are larger than one car size. So I'm just wondering how that sort of ties up with the fact that you've got a couple of minibuses in 7, which are going to take more than 2, how that ties up with the potential.
With respect to the parking layout that's been suggested, what I have recommended within condition 5 is that 2 of the spaces are increased in width. So looking at that plan on the projector there, if you look at the northern spaces, there is room to widen the first space, to retain the second one as a standard space, and then to widen the third space as a 3-metre wide space. So what condition 5 looks to achieve is 7 parking spaces, of which 2 would be widened. Having had a look at the types of minibuses that are on site currently and previously, I think currently there's some Peugeot type vehicles. Having looked at Peugeot's details for those, their sort of width and length is comparable to a modern large estate type car. They're not the sort of 12-seater minibuses which would be of a complete size up. I would describe them more as people mover type vehicles. I believe that this parking layout will provide a suitable parking solution for the site, which is an improvement under the existing situation where the parking bays aren't demarcated at all, and also the original access was set further to the south, whereas this proposal looks to bring the access more central to the parking area, thereby providing improved access to and from the spaces.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you. Mrs Townsend Rhodes mentioned complaints to environmental health about noise and various disturbance. On page 62 of 123, third paragraph from the bottom, no noise complaints have been received by Council's environmental health team for Stoke Lodge. Is there any comment on that, please?
All I can say, Councillor Bound, is that during the assessment of the application and drafting the report, I checked with the Environmental Health Department and asked them specifically whether or not they were aware of any complaints that had been received, and the answer I received was that they had not received any.
When somebody complains, do they get a sort of a reference number that they refer back to?
I'm afraid that's a question you'd have to ask an environmental health officer. I'm not aware of how they deal with their procedures.
Councillor Hussey.
A slight deviation. Environmental health records are not accurate. They have stated to me in a recent case about no complaints received, and the lady produced emails going back 8 years from environmental health acknowledging complaints. Going back to this particular application, I know that there's been at least one complaint to environmental health.
Any more questions? Then debate. Councillor Hussey, yes, you're the one.
Page 6 of the officer's report reasons that for 8 non-residential staff and 11 clients, 7 parking spaces are required. Now, I disagree that is not enough. Residents often see cars crammed onto the site, and members should have received photos from residents. And if you look at those photos, one in particular shows 9 vehicles crammed onto the site. With that layout there, based on current practice, they would squeeze 3 more cars.
Councillor, your voice is not being picked up. Can you get the machine? Thank you.
With that layout there, based on current practice and photographic evidence to show it, 3 more vehicles would be parked between the 2 rows of parked cars. There's other photos that show only 7 cars on site, but badly parked, and therefore you've got 1 car on double yellow lines outside and the minibus parks outside on double yellow lines. Now, we're being asked to accept that with 1 extra member of staff, the number of spaces required will reduce from 9 at present to only 7. It doesn't add up. The theoretical calculations, and it's a formula that our officers have to apply, is not appropriate for current practice at Stoke Lodge. The minibus, when it parks on site, often sticks out onto the pavement by up to a metre. That's a huge amount. A metre onto it causes an obstruction. Overflow parking also occurs down the road in the lay-by opposite. 7 spaces is totally inadequate for this type of enterprise. By adding another member of staff and 2 more residents with visitors, the parking requirement will increase. Now, my main concern is also safety. The entrance to Stoke Lodge is almost directly opposite QMC, and it's the exit from QMC where cars come out of the car park. Now, we all know what students are like. They buzz out there, they're in Mum's car, and Mum's car's rather special because it's capable of show-off speeds. We also have learner drivers being picked up and being deposited back at the college, and I've seen as many as 7 driving school cars outside the college at one time, in one view. So you've got cars reversing out into Cliddesden Road with learner drivers. It's madness. 7 spaces isn't enough. There will need more. It will require the cars to continue to reverse out onto Cliddesden Road. Now, the officer's report states that the design is domestic, appearing as 2 semi-detached bungalows. They each have a bedroom, bathroom, separate WC, open plan kitchen, lounge. They have water, sewage, electricity. And as a building, they're not dependent on Stoke Lodge. They're standalone, and there's sufficient width at the side of Stoke Lodge to provide vehicle access if required at a future date. It's only the use that ties it to Stoke Lodge, not the building design. Now, we've heard that the houses in Clidderton Road are Victorian, late Edwardian, they're very long gardens, and many properties, can you put the map up for me please that I asked for? You can see the length of the gardens. Now many of those properties, albeit with detached garages, but they could be removed, can provide access to the rear of their gardens. You can't see the numbers there, but most of them can. There's one particularly large building called Copper Beeches Hotel, which is actually two houses with a bridge over the top. You can provide two-way vehicle access to the rear of Copper Beeches. Now, Stoke Lodge was a private home until several years ago, then became an old people's home and more recently a care home. Now, if an application was received in the future for a change of use back to a private residence, I believe that we wouldn't really be able to refuse it. And if we did, we'd certainly lose it on appeal. Now, if it changed back to a private residence, what would be the status of the semi-detached bungalows in the rear garden? They're not dependent on Stoke Lodge. Policy E1 states that all development proposals should respond to the local context of buildings in terms of design, siting, density and spacing, and reinforce attractive qualities of local distinctiveness. And yet, Policy E1 is given as a reason for approval. But on page 61 of the officer's report, the fifth paragraph down says, the proposed building is sited in such a way that it would be entirely shielded from public view. Therefore, there would be no detrimental impact. Well, if it's shielded and there's no detrimental impact, how can it be consistent with Policy E1? At least you're trying to squeeze something into a shoe that don't fit. So, I actually believe that this sets a precedent, a dangerous precedent, for other properties to follow suit in the future. And it is garden grabbing, and it would change the character of these Victorian Edwardian houses. So because of the inadequate parking, the dangerous manoeuvres, reversing out into Clidderton Road, it may not be a major thoroughfare, but it's like a racing track with student cars. And anyone who's had students there and visited QMC ourselves will have known that. And because it's garden grabbing, and many other houses in theory could follow suit, setting this as a precedent, I actually propose that we should overlook the fact that this is a care home with special needs. It's only its use that makes it different. The actual building is a semi-detached bungalow that could be sold separately for private residence. So I propose that we should refuse the application.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Having supported the Old Worthing Road development, I'd just like to say that this is an entirely different case. Clidderton Road is a very tricky road. It doesn't have the broadness or the seclusion of Old Worthing Road, so this is entirely different. And I appreciate everything that Councillor Hussey said, and I do agree with him. I think I don't think this road can take any more traffic. I think it's got too much already. It's a horrible road to go up. It's got, I think, probably more than one care home, group home in it. And with QMC churning out so many onto it, it actually must be an awful road to live in. It sounds as also, I mean, whilst obviously I greatly applaud and encourage the work that's being done in this care home, and I think it's needed and it's great, we do have to think of the neighbours, and it sounds to me as if enough is enough for them. It really specifically says in the report on page 62 that these houses are going to be used for people with really challenging behaviour who need to be separated from the main home in order to be dealt with, which I think sounds like it could be a nightmare for the neighbours. So, yes, I think on all of the grounds that Councillor Hussey has said, I don't suppose that there is actually a planning policy that we can cite because of the potential nuisance to neighbours, but certainly for all of the reasons that Councillor Hussey has said, I would support refusal.
Any more comments? Councillor Bound.
Yes, I mean, I think my planning, my sort of past history in terms of these sorts of developments, if anybody remembers, would probably say that I would be in favour of this development. I'm very much in favour of sort of care in the community and giving people with complex needs that chance of independence to better their futures. But I do find myself agreeing with Councillor Taylor in this instance, and I think that the road really isn't suitable. I mean, I don't know where the closest facilities are to this site, but I mean, one of the things is about putting care in the community is that these people can easily be got to places where they can experience what other members of society can experience. And it does seem to me that, from my very vague recollections of the area, that it's quite some way from those facilities. And I do take on board what the Mrs. Townsend Rose said. You know, they've got 9 people there already, and they're going to have 2 more. There may or may not have been complaints to environmental health. We don't really know about that, but I think I tend to agree that perhaps 9 is enough. 11 is probably a bit too much.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor Potter.
Possibly comment for the sake of it, but I mean, I certainly endorse the reservations that have been expressed by the other councillors. I mean, I think we all would say the right things about this type of facility being urgently required. Obviously, it goes without saying. I've never been quite convinced about this sort of location being fundamental to the care that's provided, because it seems to me there's a limitation in terms of that integration back into the community can actually occur from the units in question. So I think we're entitled to take proper account of the impact it has upon the local community, and I think we all know the area well enough to say that additional traffic is going to create a problem which I think is too much along there. And I do actually think that you know, in my case, I can say I voted against the old Worthing Road one, so I mean I'm consistent in that regard. And I think this is, you know, a backland development which I think is unacceptable in this particular neighbourhood. So I support other councillors in opposing this application.
Thank you. Councillor Hussey, you proposed. Has anybody seconded it? Councillor Bowen, you second it? Just before we take a vote on that, do you want to outline the possible refusal? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as I understand the potential reasons for refusal, just to clarify on one point, that there would be a policy E1 could support the, as I understand it, the committee would be saying effectively the increased intensity of the use, acknowledging the fact that the existing use is there and it has an impact already. So it's effectively saying the additional increase in the intensity of use in the proposal formed could form a reason for refusal in terms of impact on amenity, if that's the way the committee chose to go. So that would be reason for refusal number 1. My only comment on that, as I would point out, would be in terms of the Environmental Health Officer's comments of no objection, but also committee members may recall an application which went to appeal admittedly a number of years ago in Wildmoor Lane, where similar issues were raised, and I think the inspector's commentary there in summary was that yes, there can be stark noises made which are disturbing, but nevertheless they can be similar in other properties as well. I would just simply raise that as a way in which this has been addressed at appeals previously, but that could be reason for refusal number 1. The second reason for refusal, I understand, in terms of overdevelopment of the site and impact on the character of the area being backland development. I think the only caution I suppose I would raise there is that the application has to be considered on the basis of it being an ancillary building to the current premises. I understand the point that yes, if the building's there, what would stop in a future application turning the whole building back into residential use? I think the issue is that you'd have to consider that at the time, and whilst it may be possible to speculate that there'd be no reason to refuse that application, equally we do have policies which actually protect community-based facilities such as these, so it may equally be the case that you could speculate that the application would be refused. So I think you can only determine it on the basis of what's before you at this moment in time, and effectively it is an ancillary building to the main dwelling. So I think the overdevelopment reason for refusal would be weak in my opinion. With regards to the highways impact, I think the difficulty there is that the council's adopted standards require 7 spaces, so I understand the points being raised about the nature of vehicles accessing, but ultimately the council's own policies require 7 spaces. So numerically I don't think there's a position to be had. I think the only option I suppose that I could put forward to the committee listening to the concerns is more to do with the layout of those spaces and the sort of characteristics of the adjoining highway, as to the concern being around that as opposed to the actual numerical position in terms of car parking spaces.
Right, which reasons for refusal do we want to take forward, members? Councillor Hussey.
I'd just like to come back on some of the comments that Mike has made about the rear garden development because of its use. The fact is that this is an application for semi-detached bungalows in a rear garden, and I'm quoting from a document here which is 5 years old, and it talks about about garden development, and it says will dramatically transform council's ability to prevent unwanted development on gardens where local people object and to protect the character of their neighbourhoods. It doesn't talk about use, it's about the built form, and that's the point that I want to concentrate on. It's the built form, because once that has been established in one garden, then how do you defend against future applications for a similar built form in other gardens? Its use can change with an application, but if Choice Homes wanted to come forward and sell to raise money for a purpose-built building elsewhere, we're not going to turn them down on that, are we?
Again, hopefully if I can assist with that. I think you're absolutely right. You can refuse, if you like, on the basis that the built form is not in keeping with the character of the area, but that has to be on the basis of the application as submitted, so that's why the use becomes pertinent to that point, because yes, you could say the building is too large for the plot, it has an impact on the character of the area just by virtue of its size, but the way I would look at that would be to say, well, if this was a standard residential property, would you be saying the same if it was a large outbuilding ancillary to the main residential property? I think that's the main way in which to look at it. If the committee's view that is the case, that just the size of the building itself, irrespective of use, means that there's detrimental impact on the character of the area, then that would be one of the reasons for refusal potentially taken forward.
Right, Councillor Taylor.
Could the inappropriateness of the road be a suitable reason for refusal, in that it's a road which is quite narrow, which has got institutions all the way along it, several care homes, group homes, it's got QMC which is increasing in its traffic because it's increased in size and obviously more and more students are driving. And I know that this is only small, but incrementally, little by little, we're getting more and more cars churning out onto one road. So although this is small, there's got to be a point at which we say enough is enough. And policy E1, part 3, says that a development shouldn't generate traffic of a type or amount inappropriate for the roads. And I wonder if we could take this as being, actually, this is one too many.
I think I'm sure Mr Shepherd will come in and correct me from a technical highways point of view, but I think the issue is effectively trying to demonstrate those 2 additional parts are the kind of the breaking point. I think that's quite difficult. I do understand the point, it's the cumulative impact, in which case I think it would be, if the committee's view is that it's inappropriate, then that would be the reason for refusal we would take forward, but I think it's difficult to argue on that particular point.
Councillor Bound.
Could I just ask the officers, I don't know this area, so I don't know what's at the back of this garden, because it strikes me that they've lessen the garden area. So you had 9 people who had access to a large garden, and now you're going to have 11 people who've got access to a much smaller area of garden. And I just wondered whether that's going to affect the amenity value of the people at the back, if there are people there. I don't know.
To the rear of the site, if you like, if the northern half of the garden is allotments, to the southern sort of part, once again, if I can just stand up. There. That's a neighbouring dwelling house, so that would be their rear garden. I think it's 42 Neville Close, thank you. With regard to the amount of space left, if you like, for the existing residents, there would be, behind the proposed building, there would be a remaining garden depth of 24 metres.
Excuse me, but on rising land. It rises from Neville Close up to Cliddesden Road.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, I think we've just got to maintain, well, you know what a stubborn bunch we are anyway, really, and I mean, it just seems to me that Mike has been very clear in terms of the warnings that he's given us in regard to the frailty of some of the things that we're suggesting, but I think we've just got to go with it. I think I'm judging, sorry, the view of the committee is that we see inadequacies in terms of this application, and I think we can, in terms of the things we've listed about the backland development, in terms of it not having an adverse impact on highway safety, we argue differently, I think, in the context of Cliddesden Road as we know it. And I know what the formulae say in regard to parking provision, additional car usage and all the rest of it. That isn't the way this place works, and my guess, and I say this openly, is that it isn't always the case that the residents are taken away from the place to their original homes. It's more likely visitors come to this place, and I'd argue that in terms of my knowledge of other similar establishments, and therefore the sort of car usage in that area is likely to be substantial. And I think on that basis we would argue that there are significant reasons for the rejection that we're putting forward. We'll stand the test on that, or somebody will. More likely Mike, but he's really good at these sort of things, so it's okay. Really.
Councillor Hussey.
It's a question. We've got a row of Victorian, late Edwardian buildings, and we've got a modern semi-detached bungalow in the rear garden, yet reason for approval number 1 says the proposed development would be of appropriate design and relates to surrounding development in a sympathetic manner. Well, it's exactly the opposite of that. Can you explain how a modern semi-detached bungalow relates to a late Edwardian dwelling with a long garden?
I think there's a judgment there as to whether or not what you're looking at is an ancillary building of the sort that you might reasonably expect in the back of a property, or whether or not that is, you know, particularly out of keeping with, if you like, the broader residential character of the area. Keeping in mind, I suppose, also that actually any of the existing residents would have permitted development rights with regard to our outbuildings in their own back gardens, regardless of whether they wanted them to be used, you know, for the purpose they wish to use them. So I don't feel there's a particular conflict in respect of the statements in the report.
Just one comment.
Right.
I'm certain the residents would love to know that a semi-detached bungalow with all mod cons is a warehouse in a back garden, or an outbuilding, or stabling horses.
Right. Members, we seem to have come to 3 reasons: noise, highways, and overdevelopment. Are you happy with those as reasons for refusal? Let us therefore go to a vote for those in favour of refusal. Thank you. That vote is carried. And no one against. No. Who's going to sum up? That's fine. No. We don't have to, right?
Thank you, members. The application is refused.
Right, now we move on to item number 5, please, which is the land adjacent to the garden house in Pamber Heath. And I have Bruce Acton in support of it, but first of all, Mark Turner will present. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. This application is page 70 of the agenda. The applications for the erection of 2 detached dwellings with detached garages in the well, it would have been the former garden associated or adjacent to the garden house in the Glen, Pamber Heath. In terms of the member update, members attended the site and met with representatives of the parish council. They'd been specifically asked to view the proposal site from the rear garden of 28 Impston Road to gain an appreciation of any visual impact the proposal would have on the residential occupiers of this property. It's worth bearing in mind members had previously visited the site 2 months ago. With regard to a similar application, this has obviously been amended to overcome concerns and reasons for refusal. The previous application being refused on the grounds the development would be inappropriate design, failing to relate to the surrounding area, and the proposed dwelling on plot 2 would have an overbearing impact on the neighbouring property as a result of undue loss of privacy, overlooking lack of community infrastructure contributions. This is an amended scheme and recommended for approval, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Bruce Acton, please. You will have 4 minutes, Mr. Acton, and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. I'm a planning consultant with Gregory Gray Associates. I've got quite extensive past experience in local government development management for my sins. Grateful to the officer for just clarifying or reminding members what the previous reasons for refusal were that this application attempts to overcome. And I don't want to add or take issue too much with the officer's report on this. The third reason for refusal, I think, has been dealt with through the submission of a Section 106 agreement to deal with that particular point. So I think that relates to the community infrastructure, which I think is now dealt with. To clarify also, the siting of the dwellings remain as per the amendments to the previous application, but in order to address the design issue and specifically the impact on the Bracken Lodge, the bulk and height of plot 2 have been reduced. Both dwellings would be split level to reflect the levels of the site and surrounds, but the maximum ridge height of plot 2 would now be 7.5 metres. I won't quote too many more measurements. I think the key thing from the cross sections which were produced with the application is the relative heights when we're discussing whether or not there is an overbearing impact or a loss of privacy. The distance from plot 1 to the rear elevation of the extension to 28 Impstone Road, I know there was some confusion on that, but it is 25.2 metres to the rear elevation of the extension and 28 metre separation distance between first floor windows. Again, I don't need to quote standards to this committee, but that does significantly exceed the council standards of 20 metres between directly facing windows. More broadly, the emphasis has been to maintain a lower density and informal layout of development similar to the area around the Glen, and not to replicate the more formal estate character found along Impstone Road. We do have individually designed dwellings which are in keeping with the character of those in the Glen in terms of their layout and design. Planting and landscaping is of course key to seeing this character through, and where there are detailed and good comments from the landscape officer contained within the report, the only point I would emphasise from that is the focus that would be put on the dense planting to fill in any gaps along the shared boundary with dwellings in Impstone Road, which the landscape officer notes is visible in views between dwellings from Impstone Road. So if I can just return finally to the previous concerns regarding the privacy and overlooking, this did refer only to plot 2, and that has been redesigned and reduced in bulk as described with the incorporation of dormer windows. There are only oblique views from the front windows towards the garden house, and the occupier of Bracken Lodge, which was deemed to have been unacceptably affected previously, has now confirmed that they do not object to this amended submission. I know that there are concerns about the relationship between Plot 1 and the dwellings to the south in Impstone Road. I can only reiterate that these were not part of the previous reasons for refusal, but nonetheless the distance separations and relative site levels that I referred to at the outset are such as to comply with council standards and to avoid any material loss of privacy or an overbearing impact, and the ridge heights are lower than those of Impstone Road owing to the differing levels of the sites. Issues of whether something can be seen or whether a private view is affected are not, of course, material planning considerations. I think that's all I need to say, Chairman, unless there are any questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have questions for Mr. Acton? No? Okay. Questions to officers? Oh, yes, yes, please.
Just going back to the previous and the current application, can you just summarise again the height issue that you were talking about? Again, the current as against the previous.
I think I've been switched off. Oh no, I'm on again. The cross sections that were produced with the current application demonstrate that the heights are lower than those in Impstone Road. There is a maximum ridge height now of 7.5 metres above the ground level to finished floor level. I think that is about half a metre lower than was previously the case, but the other changes I think that I would emphasise is to the bulk and mass, whereby dormer windows have been incorporated into the roof of the proposal on that plot now, which reduces the overall bulk or mass of the property, and the reason for that is to attempt to reduce the impact or the sense of overbearing on the neighbouring dwelling.
Thank you, Mr. Acton. No more questions? No. Thank you. Questions to officers, but the officers want to clarify a point.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just to clarify something that Mr. Acton said with regard to the 106 agreement. Section 106 agreement has been entered. I'm advised by my colleagues this afternoon that it has not yet been completed, which is why I'll point you or redirect you to the recommendation. There are two elements here. The recommendation being subject to your confirmation that the applicant be invited to enter into an agreement because it hasn't yet been completed. Should obviously the requirements set above with regard to the agreement not be satisfactorily secured, then the planning and development manager be delegated to refuse the permission for appropriate reasons. There is something else to bear in mind on completion of the legal agreement and subject to any to no additional adverse material planning objections being raised. In essence, the Glen is a public right of way. That was picked up later in the application, and as a result we've re-advertised as a new site notice gone up. The period for comment with regard to the public right of way expires in 2 days' time. We've had no comment as a result, but it's important to give that extra time. So what we're suggesting is obviously if no adverse comment is made, then it'd be delegated to grant permission. So Mr. Acton's right, there is a section 106, but the important thing is it's not yet complete.
Thank you for that. Right, members. Councillor Potter, followed by Councillor Bound, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Well, if I may, Chair, just trying to move us forward, really. I mean, I'm pleased to note the Office for Nuclear Regulation doesn't have any objection against the development, so that gives me some comfort. I wasn't unsympathetic to the original application, I have to tell you, and I think it was recorded. And I do commend those that have been involved with this for the sort of adjustments that they've been able to make. I went on the viewing. One of the things that was naturally of concern, I think, was the sort of height and the impact in terms of visual aspects of this from 28 Impstone Road. We saw the site directly, and looking at the comparative ridge heights, I think I was happy that this wasn't going to be overbearing in regard to that particular property or others in Imstone Road. And certainly those changes that have been made in respect to Plot 2, which obviously was the major concern on the original application in terms of bulk and height, I think have been satisfied. And on that basis, from my own perspective, I'd be happy to move approval of this application, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Bound.
I don't think I need to say any further other than to second the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder whether I could just be shown a view, please, of the proposed west elevation of Plot 2.
Happy? I have a proposer and a seconder. Shall we take a vote for approval, please? Those in favour? Unanimous. Vote is unanimous and carried. And will you sign it off?
So, Chair, just to clarify, approval granted subject to the 106 agreement I've already discussed, obviously delegated to Mr Townsend should the 106 not be satisfactorily entered into, and then clearly we've got this extra couple of days pending any adverse material comments with regard to the extra advertisement and consultation period. Other than that, to approve in line with the proposed conditions.
Thank you very much. Now we move to item number 7, 18 Eastrop Lane. In support, I have Leo Mulcairns who's going to speak, but Trevor Campbell-Smith will present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the demolition of an existing side conservatory and utility and the erection of a new single-storey side and rear extension with internal alterations, including the conversion of a garage store to living accommodation. The application is before committee with a recommendation for approval, and there is one small item with regard to an update, which just simply refers to a typographical error on proposed condition 5, which refers to the south elevation, but should in fact refer to the windows on the north elevation, which should be obscured glazed.
Thank you. Members, just to let you know, Mr Mulcairns is an employee of the applicant, Peter Smith is, sorry, is an employee of Basingstoke and Dean, and that's why it's come before us. Mr Mulcairns, you have 4 minutes.
That's it. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Leo Mulcairns and I act as the agent for the application. This single-storey side and rear extension to a domestic dwelling has been brought to the committee, as you quite rightly say, because the applicants are employees of Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. A brief synopsis of the proposal is as follows. It replaces a side conservatory extension of a similar footprint. It has a flat roof design to reduce the impact on the surrounding properties. It has rendered walls to reflect the daylight between the houses, and it incorporates the existing detached garage by converting it into habitable accommodation, and the building does not extend to the rear any further than the existing rear garage. My client has worked with the planning officer and also myself and taken into consideration the points raised by their neighbour at number 20 Eastrop Lane, and after revisions and detailed discussions has put together a compromise proposal, the details of which are contained within the planning officer's report, and as Richard note, is recommended for approval with conditions attached, and obviously condition of 5 has been brought to your attention just now on the update sheet. Also, the property benefits from permitted development rights and therefore a material consideration as a fallback, as the side extension measuring 3 metres in height could be constructed in any terms. Therefore, an additional 0.5 metres in height proposal for this application I feel cannot be considered as a significantly harmful as to warrant refusal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mulcairns. Members, any questions to Mr. Mulcairns? No? Thank you very much, sir. Questions to officers? No? Debate. Councillor Leeks.
Chairman, I was just going to move the recommendation. I've looked at it and I've seen no problem. And there's no ward councillor here. I don't think he said no problems anyway.
I have a proposal and a seconder. Can we vote in approval, please? Those in favour? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So the recommendation is to approve in line with the listed conditions.
We move on to item number 8, which is Tarnagala. Forgive me if I've misspelt it, mispronounced it. And I have two speakers, Julie Shawley and Councillor Leek. And Mark Turner, you're going to present.
Thank you, Chair. This application's, I believe it's Tarnagala, 17 Monk Sherborne Road, Ramsdale. The proposal's a proposed 2-storey side and rear extensions and the erection of a detached double garage following demolition of existing extension and outbuildings. The report's before you with a recommendation to refuse. By way of update, Chair, simply to record, members attended the site last week in terms of viewing, met the applicant, his agent and Councillor Leek on site. They viewed the proposal site from all sides, were asked to view the property from inside to gain an understanding of the existing room sizes. On leaving the site, members were also invited to view the property from Monk Sherborne Road to gain an appreciation for the proposal's impact on the public domain. Other than that, Chair, I've no further update.
Thank you, Mark. Right. I've just got Julie Shawley, but that you between you, you have 4 minutes, and I'll give you 1 minute's notice. Yeah, and you press the big bar to get.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Julie Shawley, and I'm the agent for this application. The application is for a 2-storey side and rear extension to an existing 2-storey house. The house was built in 1912 and therefore has small rooms, as was typical of its time. In order to create a living space that is commensurate with today's standards, we are proposing a rear extension which will be largely open plan and a side extension which will enlarge the existing living area. During the application process, the proposals have been amended a number of times at the request of the planning officer. We have now reached a situation where the planning officer is happy with all aspects of the design, with the exception of the side element of the extension. The planning officer's reason for refusal is that the side element is not subservient to the existing house. The officer makes reference to Appendix 13 of the Design and Sustainability Supplementary Planning Document, Extending Your Home and Replacement Dwellings, and states numerous passages from it. The document states that extensions should be set back from the main building and appear subservient to the existing house. When we looked at the layout for this room in order to make the extension subservient, the room would become too long and narrow and would be cramped once the furniture is added. We feel that in order to create the space required, it is necessary to extend forward of the existing house. The existing room is 12 foot wide, and we are proposing an extension which would be 15 foot wide. If we were to make the extension subservient, it would only be 11 foot wide, which in our opinion is too narrow. Appendix 13 recognises that in some circumstances it may not be appropriate to design an extension which is truly subservient in every respect. The planning officer has even quoted from the document stating that in some instances it may be appropriate to match the roof height of the extension with that of the existing property. The proposed design ensures that the extension continues the ridge and eaves height of the existing house, ensuring it is not overly dominant. A gable projection to the front creates a visual break between the extension and the existing house, and therefore maintains the visual integrity of the existing house by introducing a different building element. The two closest houses to this site both have gable projections, so this is an established feature and therefore maintains the character of the area. The projection extends only about 18 inches forward of the existing house, so will have limited impact when viewed from the side. The external materials for the extension will match as close as possible to the existing house. Finally, I would like to say that Appendix 13 is only guidance for the design of extensions and is not planning policy. It would therefore seem that there is some flexibility in the design of extensions, and historic applications for other sites would support this. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Mrs. Shawley? No? Then thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Questions to officers? Oh, Councillor Leek, I'm sorry. Oh dear, oh dear.
I'm going to be brief because it's well past my drinking time. You've heard what the agent said and explained about the size of the rooms. They're extremely small because of the nature and age of the house. What I want to really say is over the past 10 years there has been a significant number of new dwellings constructed in Charter Alley, which itself is a relatively small hamlet, but there really have been a lot of houses. 10 of affordable housing, and there have been many significant extensions to existing dwellings. Although of various shapes and sizes, and if anybody goes out there they could certainly see that, these have not had an adverse impact on the rural character and appearance of the area. As members will have seen, the property lies on the western edge of Charter Alley, and unlike most other properties in the hamlet, it sits in a large garden well back from the road. The extension, as you've heard, is actually modest in size, and I suggest that, contrary to the officer's reasons for refusal, would not result in an overly dominant feature of the front elevation and would not detract from the visual qualities of the existing dwelling, nor of, as I've said, of the rural character and appearance of the area. Although the policy encourages extensions to be subservient, it is not mandatory. In this case, it would be counterproductive, as we've heard, because the extension just wouldn't provide anything up to modern standards, and I therefore ask you to approve the application. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions for Councillor Lee? No? Thank you. Debate. Oh, questions to officers? None? Right, we'll move on to debate then. Do I have any contributions? Councillor Potter.
Well, I was only going to help yours and Councillor Leek's drinking time if I could, really, but I hesitate to say I speak for others, but I think I probably do because I went on the viewing with others and I think we were starting to form a view. I understand the subservient arguments in regards to the planning conditions that apply, but when the dwelling itself is so small in the first place, and when what we saw is, in modern terms, pretty unusable unless something realistic is actually added on to make it a habitable dwelling suitable for a family unit, it seems to me, in that regard, the regulation, and Councillor Leek makes the point, isn't mandatory, isn't prescriptive, it's advice, and I think what we saw really suggests that this proposal, in my own words, is pretty empathetic really in the way that it's been designed. I don't see it contradicting in any way with the design of the existing dwelling. In fact, I see it enhancing it. In regard to, I think probably I'm talking about the western elevation, I don't have an issue with that, and I certainly don't think it's going to create the sort of problems as people drive down the road. I don't think they're going to be offended by the sort of elevation they'll see. That's my own subjective view. And quite frankly, I think it's a good design. It's going to make this dwelling much more usable than it is currently, and I'd like to move approval. I'm sorry to contradict the officers. I always am in these regards, but it's well, I am generally. I mean, I think it's a subjective view that I have, and when it comes to design, it's always subjective a little, I think. And I'd stay with what I've said. I'd like to move approval, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bound,
Yes,
followed by Councillor Taylor.
I drive that way frequently, ferrying children, and there are a wide range of buildings down that road going up towards the crossroads near the church, and I don't think this would particularly stand out as being anything other than something slightly different, and I would second the Councillor Potter's.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor. Thank you. Carried.
Thank you, Chair. Suggested conditions would be approved plans, time limit, materials to match, and obviously retaining an ancillary use of the garage itself as part of the scheme. Sorry, yes, and obviously reason for approval will be not being disproportionate to the existing dwelling, and therefore not causing any harm to the character of the street scene.
Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on to item number 9 now, 22 Barrington Drive, and I have to speak Mr. Bennett, followed by Councillor Mrs. Frankham, and Trevor Campbell-Smith will introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the conversion of a detached garage to a children's playroom. The application is before committee with a recommendation for approval. Just one note, really, with regard to the update paper, which simply reflects the fact that members went and visited the site as part of the viewing panel.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Bennett, you have 4 minutes, and I'll give you 1 minute's notice towards the end. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'd just like to confirm in what I'm trying to do, as I believe that there's a misunderstanding from people who have concerns. I understand that there's a parking problem in Barrington Drive. All I'm looking to do is put a French door into the side of my garage wall, which leads into my garden. The garage will be insulated with a stud wall. The garage door will not change and will stay in position. I've met the council criteria of 3 cars on my driveway, and in fact I can get 4. What I'm trying to achieve, I don't believe will cause any issues to Barrington Drive itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett. Members, any questions for Mr. Bennett? No? Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Councillor Frankham.
Thank you. Can I, before my 4 minutes start, bring to the attention there are no objectors here because none of the objectors were informed that this was coming to committee tonight. I've spoken to 3 of them today. All of them have confirmed to me they have received no letter, they've received no notice, and are asking me to speak on their behalf because in all cases none of them can get here. But I just say that in ahead, and then if you don't mind, I'll start.
Do you want to explain the process? Yes, can we just explain the process? I think we ought to clear that one up.
So I'm certainly not doubting what Councillor Frankham's saying. It's just simply in terms of the way that we register objections. I don't know whether there's been a mix-up there, but effectively an objection comes in, we send an acknowledgement letter out, and what that gives is the opportunity for someone to register to speak if they wish to. They should certainly have received an acknowledgement letter to their objection. If they haven't, then I'll investigate that tomorrow. What that means is that they won't necessarily be notified of the meeting date unless they have registered to speak at the meeting. So effectively it's they return the acknowledgement to us to say, I would like to register to speak if it goes to committee, at which point we let them know.
Councillor Hussey, you want to?
I'm recently aware of that procedure because it had affected an application we discussed this evening. Many people object and would like to come to a meeting to hear the application debated. Many people don't have the competence to be public speakers. They write in their objections, they want to be here. They need to know when the application is being debated, when it's being determined. I mean, if it's a petition with 2,000 signatures on, obviously we don't write to all 2,000 people, but you could write to the lead petitioner. So I can't see any objections in having a procedure change so that objectors are notified of the meeting date when that application will be determined.
We'll agree to look at that for you. Councillor Frankham, do you want to continue?
Yes, please. I'd just like to bring to your attention that one of the objectors turned around and told me specifically asked that if it comes to development control that he be informed, and he wasn't. So obviously there's a problem here, and if you're going to look at it, I'll take it at that. But we really should give the residents a chance, if they've bothered to object, to have the opportunity. If they don't know that there's a meeting, they can't register to speak.
Yeah, we'll look at it. Thank you.
Carry
on.
Right, can I start now?
Yes, do.
Right. Basically, this has been a bit of a nightmare because the notice wasn't put up. We had to bring that to their attention. So it's been brought back, which is one of the reasons why I've not extended it by saying that we should give the objectors a chance to be here. My concern with this application is the residents knew when they bought this property that there was a condition, as on page 120 of 123 at the top, condition number 6. That it was because we knew, developers, planners, councillors, that there was a problem, there wasn't enough garages. So the reason they had to bring it here was because it's not permitted development, and they knew that by that condition. Sorry, but my hearing aid is not working. My problem is, if there is a condition, you know there's a condition, and you can just come to the development control. I don't know what we're doing here. If we make a condition, if we make covenants and conditions, and they can just be roughshod over. At the viewing, the officer said that the bins could be stored in the front garden, where, as you saw, there was a car parked. This is 4 bins. Yes, because one of them could be the food waste, which is something that's going through, which could lead to vermin and wildlife foraging for food. Parking, as you know, is a problem, so much of a problem that our Basingstoke-and-Deane officer, Mr Barry Ford, has now got to go to Cabinet, is preparing a report for double yellow lines all through that road, or the other option is to do nothing because it's so bad, how do you address it, or on the corners where it's dangerous. So therefore there is a problem with parking, there is a problem because children go to school along there. When I was walking along there, there was a gentleman pushing his invalid wife in a wheelchair in the middle of the road because he can't get past because all the cars are parked on the path. I did bring this up at the last meeting with Mike, saying that Barry Ford should be involved, and I hope that something will be done about that. I know that wasn't all, but believe it or not, I'm really nervous because I really think this is. I'm so worried for the children. that will be using that. And also I'm quite angry that we do conditions we take all the time that we do, sitting here in committee, and it can just be thrown away. And the other thing I'd like to maybe bear in mind in the future, thank you, in the future is when we do parking provision, we count all the garages as parking provision. You and I and the world knows that at least 25 to 50% of people don't use them for parking. If we permit this, we're underlining and saying, no, you don't have to park there. Therefore, we know we're not giving enough parking. So I really would urge that on this occasion that you do refuse this application for safety, because it will look different. You're going to have cars and bins along the front of the houses where it's very nice. It's the gateway into the estate, and I think it'll just look awful. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Members, questions for Councillor Frankham? No? Then questions to officers? Yes, Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask the highways officer, do you consider that there's adequate parking on site, i.e. off-road?
Taking into account the available area of hard standing to the side and the front of the property, it does comply with our current car parking requirements.
Councillor Potter?
I wonder if we could just get the officer clarification on the issue that Councillor Frankham's raised, and I think for the public record as well, obviously in regard to the planning condition stroke covenant that's referred to in regard to this development. And as Councillor Franklin has pointed out on page 120 of the report at the top of the page, the condition is listed: the garages, carports and car barns hereby approved shall not be converted or used for any residential purpose other than as domestic garages stroke parking. I mean, my understanding of that is that clearly that's done in good faith at the time, but it is subject to an individual applicant saying, I'm not content with that condition, I want to see it changed, and here's my application to get that changed. That's what's before us this evening, as far as I understand it. So in other words, although that's applied originally as a condition, it can be overridden by a new application which we're considering tonight. I mean, in whatever way I describe, not cast in stone, not insurmountable in regard to an applicant making the type of application that's before us tonight. Is that right?
Yes, Councillor Potter. Effectively, when a condition is placed such as that, an applicant, whomsoever that may be, has the right under Section 73 of the Act to make an application to vary or remove a particular condition, and that is what has happened in this particular instance. In those circumstances, it is the individual circumstances of the site which must be considered, if you like, in respect of the application, and that is where the recommendation springs from.
Tate, sorry.
Just a quick question. The development it's currently a domestic garage, and the proposal is to turn it into a children's playroom. Is that a children's playroom in a domestic environment for the children, or does it have some other usage in terms of what children are going to play there?
It would just be in association ancillary to the dwelling house. Any other form of use would require an application for planning permission in its own right.
Councillor Leeks.
Dare say it's in here somewhere. I've quickly looked. It's to highways. So what would be the minimum parking spaces for that dwelling, please?
This dwelling, we would expect to see 3 car parking spaces.
Any more questions? No? Then debate. Sorry, yes, Councillor Potter.
Brian, just to be clear, obviously officers just made the point in regard to what we saw, and just to again put it on record, we saw space, I think, in the long line, obviously for 3 cars to be parked in tandem and one obviously at right angles on what I call the sort of area in front of the front elevation. Am I right in saying that only 2 out of the 3 can be counted, and the other one would be the one in front of the dwelling would be counted as well? That would give you the 3 out of the 4 cars that physically might be parked there. Is that the way this calculation is done?
Yes, when we look at layouts which have a tandem parking arrangement, we count up to 2, so the first and the second space. If there are spaces beyond, which sometimes happens because garages are set back for urban design reasons, etc., we wouldn't count those. So in this instance, you have the first space and then a tandem space to the beyond that along the driveway, and also there's a further one to the right. So in effect, it's 2 tandem spaces, but no greater than 1 and a second car.
Any more questions? Then we'll move to debate. Does anybody have any proposals to make? Deathly silence.
So in theory then, you've been discussing the amount of rubbish bins. They could be outside the garage as opposed to being at the front.
Councillor Hood.
Thank you, Chair. It's become pretty obvious now that parking throughout the borough is becoming a nightmare. I remember 10, 20, 30 years ago when it was a lot less frequent. And we've tried to counteract that by putting conditions in place. And all of us who's been on view and has frequently gone into this part of Popley, it's been very difficult for the minibus to get through. We find that cars are parking both half on the pavement and half on the road. And when we try to do something to improve the situation, we're faced with, you can then change the condition. I feel very strongly for people like Councillor Frankham, who works very hard in the ward against surmountable problems, who is inundated with problems about parking. I find in my ward, and I'm not different from anybody else, that probably 50% of my casework is to do with parking, and it doesn't seem to get any easier. So I think that the danger tonight, if we were to approve this, then we encourage another opportunities to happen. I think that we should refuse this tonight, and I move refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Hood. Councillor Taylor.
I mean, I really appreciate Councillor Franklin's passion on this, and I recognise totally what she wants to achieve in this area. I really do. It's obviously a really difficult problem with parking. But I'm just not sure we've got a sound planning reason for refusing it. I mean, I really don't. We can't penalise one family who've got adequate parking because there's a parking problem in the whole area. And so, I mean, reluctantly, because I totally understand Councillor Franklin's passion, I would have to support approval.
Thank you. Councillor Leeks proposed it. Or are you proposing it? Proposing acceptance. Right, between you two. So I have a vote for proposal for approval. Can we take a vote on that, please? Those in favour of approval? Those against? Abstentions? No, that's right.
Otherwise you'd have 2 hands.
Okay, so that was approved.
Thank you, councillors. That application is approved, subject to the conditions listed on the order paper.
Councillor Potter.
Probably stating the obvious, if I may, Chair, but I mean, in regard to what we've experienced here on that one, and obviously I voted against the recommendation there, but I mean, I think it highlights the inadequacy of some of the modern developments that we actually approve for good reasons. Of course we do, really, but when it comes down to it, I mean, some of the calculations that are made in regard to parking provision we know are quite frankly, pie in the sky, really. I mean, many of the garages, never mind anything else, and we witness this, are pretty unusable in the context of modern vehicles. The one we saw, I mean, I could probably list the few cars that would actually be parked in there. Most reasonable size family cars wouldn't go in it. So as a consequence, the garage isn't used as a place to store the car, it's used for something else. So that's dishonest in the sense of, you know, what we're actually counting in the first place. And then, of course, we put these conditions on, which are well-intentioned. And I'm sure Councillor Frankham and the other local councillor thought they were well-intentioned when these were negotiated in the first place. But they're not, with respect, worth anything when it comes to individual applications being made afterwards. And I think, you know, we've really got to be straightforward about that in the first place, because we are denying the obvious, really, that there's massive inadequacy in terms of parking provision, isn't there? And how we can recalculate that, I don't know, probably not. But, I mean, that's the reality of what we're facing on these modern developments, isn't it?
Well, it's everywhere, and it's in the local villages too. I mean, there's no parking there. We're all suffering from it. Sorry, Councillor Frankham.
Yes, I think this is the opportune time to turn round and say that we have the highways here, they give their opinion. When they get it wrong, and they've got it wrong, and quite often got it wrong, we were viewing, not this one, the previous one, where they're going to narrow road and there's parking, etc. there. We find we have to go to our Basingstoke and Dean officer, Barry Ford, to try and sort it out. Can we please get that department involved before, so we're not fighting fires all the time and having problems like this and causing terrible problems for residents. I actually sympathise with the resident that wants to turn the garage. Those garages aren't very wide. However, they are the same size and, in some cases, I know it's only a couple of inches bigger than our garage, but we really do need to involve our officers as well and not rely always on the highways. The officer that has to sort it out should be involved.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to prolong the debate, but yeah, it strikes me, obviously, a condition. You can't make anybody use their garage to park a car in unless you some sort of legal. You can use it as a garage, but what does that define? So I think that's a risky strategy. But the other thing that seems to rile me is that we get a lot of developments where we get garage blocks, or we get garages that aren't actually within about 3 foot of someone's front door, and of course they can't possibly walk, so the garages don't get used. So one of the things that I was hoping that as we are seeing more and more I suppose greenfield developments coming along for various reasons, we've asked for the reserved matters to be shared with local members and local communities. Now that doesn't mean we're suddenly going to be far better planners than our professionals, but I think we can have some rational debate about this kind of problem and how developers have to be challenged to solve these problems, even though I know there are regulations, but we'll have to stand up to it and actually try and make these problems go away, because it's pointless actually, you know, if you stick your finger in your eye it hurts, so don't keep doing it, because you know it will keep hurting. We've got to do something. So I think hopefully going forward we can try and be worldly wise. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, you want to speak?
Hopefully I can help with that. Effectively, the issue here is not necessarily the opinion of the highways officer. The highways officer is effectively just interpreting the policies before. It's, you know, that's simply the fact of the matter. So the issue there is change the policy. The way to change the policy, effectively, I'm afraid I don't recall the exact date of the meeting, but there was a paper that went to what was P&I Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I think back at the beginning of 2014, possibly end of 2013, which said that there would be an update to the parking standards, but that would follow hand in hand after the local plan. So once the local plan's in place, then the parking standards there's an opportunity to review them and pick those issues up there. Obviously that will involve member approval. On the particular point about you can't make someone use the garage, you're absolutely right. Similarly, you can't make people park on the parking spaces. You know, we can design it as best we can, but ultimately you can't make people park where they don't want to. That said, I do entirely accept the point about parking courts and the fact that if you have places which are inconveniently parked compared to the dwellings they serve, that in itself causes a problem, which is why the standards changed to actually bring in more of a mix in terms of trying to get more courtesy parking, more on-street parking close to dwellings, not just parking courts, which was very much an issue sort of pushed through when PPG3 from memory came in place in around 2000, where it was advocating this at 1.5 parking spaces per unit, which people have their own opinion on, but effectively those things have been picked up before, but I think it is the parking standards that members will need to look to change once the local plan is in place.
It was just a quick one. Years ago, there was a councillor, I think it was a Lib Dem, Berwick Gooding, and he actually moaned about the size of garages then, and I don't think anything's been done about it. In actual fact, I think it probably got smaller, the garages.
Councillor Frankham, do you want to say something quickly?
Yes, please. Can we also, when you're meeting with developers, when it's visitor parking space, can we try and encourage them to make it visitor parking space? Because what's happened certainly in Marnell Park, and I know it's happened in other areas, they actually, to sell it, they turn around and say, and I know this because my youngest son lives in Marnell Park, and at the end, the people that bought their house, they turned around and said, oh, this is your car parking space, and that one's your car parking space, you can use that. It's actually a visitor parking space. And so visitors don't realise that you can go there. They're not realising where the parking is. So I know we can't make developers put it, but could we strongly recommend that they clearly mark when it is visitor parking space?
Thank you. Shall we move to paper C now? Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, paper C is the most recent quarterly appeals report. As I mentioned last time, the one before was slightly late, so you've had two in a row, I'm afraid. I wasn't going to spend any time on particular cases. I referred to the land at Worthing Farm at the last meeting. The only point I was going to make in terms of a general summation was there were 10 appeals referred to in this paper. 4 were allowed, 6 were dismissed. There were 2 major residential schemes, 1 enforcement application or relating to an enforcement case, and 2 listed building appeals, which I suppose is of interest at the breadth of appeal decisions that the council deals with on a regular basis.
Members, any other business? In that case, thank you very much indeed, and good night.